helplessness occurs when an individual repeatedly experiences negative events that they cannot control. Over time, they begin to believe that their actions have no effect on their environment and that they are powerless to change their circumstances. This belief then generalizes to other situations, even when escape or control is possible. The mechanism behind learned helplessness lies in the disruption of the brain's reward system. When we take action and achieve a positive outcome, our brains release dopamine, a neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and motivation. This dopamine surge reinforces the connection between our actions and the desired outcome, encouraging us to repeat those actions in the future. However, when we repeatedly experience failure and a lack of control, this reward system becomes suppressed. The brain stops releasing dopamine in response to our efforts, leading to a sense of apathy and resignation. The impact of learned helplessness can be profound. It's a key factor in depression. Individuals who feel trapped in situations they can't control, abusive relationships, dead-end jobs, chronic illness, are more likely to develop depressive symptoms. They may lose motivation, experience feelings of hopelessness and worthlessness, and withdraw from social interactions. But learned helplessness isn't confined to extreme situations. It can creep into our lives in subtle ways. Consider a student who consistently receives negative feedback on their assignments, regardless of how hard they try. They might eventually stop trying altogether, believing that they're simply incapable of succeeding. Or think of an employee who is constantly micromanaged and criticized by their boss. They may become passive and unmotivated, afraid to take initiative or offer suggestions, convinced that their efforts will be met with disapproval. The insidious thing about learned helplessness is that it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. When we believe we are powerless, we are less likely to take action, even when opportunities for change arise. This inaction then reinforces our belief in our own helplessness, creating a vicious cycle. Breaking free from learned helplessness requires a conscious effort to challenge our negative beliefs and regain a sense of control. It involves identifying the situations where we feel helpless and actively seeking out opportunities to experience success, no matter how small. It might mean setting achievable goals, practicing self-compassion, and seeking support from others. It also means recognizing when manipulative tactics are being used to induce this state and actively resisting the conditioning. It's about retraining the brain, reestablishing the connection between action and outcome, and reclaiming our power to shape our own lives. The Pygmalion effect, named after the Greek sculptor who fell in love with his own creation and willed it to life, usually refers to the power of positive expectations. But its shadow side, the negative Pygmalion effect or the golem effect, is a much more insidious manipulation, subtly chipping away at potential, stifling growth through the very act of diminishing belief. At its core, the negative Pygmalion effect operates on the principle that lowered expectations lead to lower performance. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy in reverse, with a belief in someone's inadequacy, whether conscious or unconscious, translates into behaviors that actively hinder their success. Unlike outright sabotage, this is often more subtle, a pervasive undercurrent of doubt that erodes confidence and motivation. The mechanism is complex, playing out across multiple levels. First, there's the shift in input. When someone is perceived as less capable, they receive less challenging tasks, fewer opportunities for growth, and less mentoring. Think of a manager consistently assigning the least demanding projects to a particular employee, relegating them to routine tasks that offer no chance to stretch their skills. This restricted input inherently limits their ability to learn and improve. Next comes the change in output expectancy. If you believe someone is going to fail, you're less likely to invest in their success. This translates into less time spent providing constructive feedback, less patience when they struggle, and a general reluctance to support their development. Imagine a teacher who, based on a student's past performance or perceived social background, assumes they won't excel. The teacher may then provide less detailed explanations, avoid calling on them in class, and be less enthusiastic about their efforts, effectively communicating a lack of belief in their potential. This creates a toxic feedback loop. The lack of input and the lowered output expectancy, in turn, affect the individual's motivation and self-esteem. If someone is constantly told, implicitly or explicitly, that they are not good enough, they will eventually internalize that message. They may become less proactive, less willing to take risks, and less confident in their abilities, further reinforcing the negative expectations placed upon them. They might start exhibiting learned helplessness, giving up easily when faced with challenges, convinced that their efforts are futile. The impact can be devastating, especially on vulnerable individuals. Children in school, employees in the workplace, even individuals in relationships can all be victims of the negative Pygmalion effect. Consider a child repeatedly told they are not smart or not talented by their parents or teachers. Over time, this constant negativity can cripple their self-belief, leading to academic underachievement and a general lack of confidence in their abilities, shaping their entire future trajectory. The dangers of this effect are amplified when it becomes systemic. For instance, in certain professions or institutions, negative stereotypes about specific groups can lead to widespread underestimation of their potential. This can result in fewer opportunities, less support, and ultimately, lower performance, perpetuating a cycle of inequality and injustice. It's a subtle form of discrimination, masked as realistic assessment, but with far-reaching consequences. Ultimately, understanding the negative Pygmalion effect is crucial for fostering environments where everyone can thrive. It demands a conscious effort to challenge our own biases, cultivate genuine belief in the potential of others, and provide the necessary support and opportunities for them to succeed. Failing to do so not only limits individual growth, but also deprives society of the unique talents and contributions that each person has to offer. Cognitive priming. It's the whisper in your ear that shapes your choices before you even realize a choice was presented. It's the subtle nudge, the carefully placed cue that activates specific associations in your mind, influencing your subsequent thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. At its core, cognitive priming leverages the interconnectedness of our neural networks. Each concept, memory, or idea we hold is linked to others in a vast web within our brains. When one node in this network is activated, primed activation spreads to related nodes, making those associated concepts more accessible and likely to influence our responses. Think of it like a library. When a librarian pulls a particular book or a category of books out for display, those books become more visible and likely to be borrowed. Priming is the librarian of the mind, highlighting certain mental books and making them readily available. The mechanism is deceptively simple. Exposure to a stimulus, the prime, influences a subsequent, seemingly unrelated stimulus, the target. This influence manifests because the prime has activated related concepts in your memory, influencing how you perceive and respond to the target. The priming effect operates largely unconsciously. We are often unaware that we have been primed, and even less aware of the impact it's having on our decisions. Consider a classic experiment. Participants are briefly shown words related to the elderly, such as gray, bingo, or Florida. Afterward, they're timed walking down a hallway. Remarkably, those primed with elderly-related words tend to walk slower than those primed with neutral words. This happens without the participants consciously realizing they're walking slower or even that they were exposed to the priming words. The elderly-related primes activated stereotypes and associations related to slowness, subtly influencing their gait. The applications and potential manipulations are vast. In marketing, priming is a powerful tool. Subtly associating a product with positive emotions, trustworthiness, or success can increase sales. For example, playing classical music in a wine store has been shown to increase purchases of more expensive wines. The classical music primes associations with sophistication and quality, subtly influencing purchasing decisions. Priming extends beyond auditory or visual stimuli. Even smells can act as primes. The scent of cleanliness in a store can encourage customers to keep the space tidy, even if there are no explicit instructions to do so. Similarly, the aroma of freshly baked bread can create a sense of comfort and nostalgia, increasing the likelihood of customers purchasing food items. Hypothetically, imagine a negotiator subtly primed with images of powerful figures before entering a negotiation. The exposure, even subliminal, could subtly boost their confidence and assertiveness, leading to a more favorable outcome. Conversely, priming the opposing party with images associated with cooperation and compromise could soften their stance. However, it's crucial to acknowledge the ethical implications. The power of cognitive priming raises concerns about manipulation and the potential for influencing individuals without their conscious consent or awareness. While it can be used for positive purposes, encouraging healthier behaviors, promoting cooperation, or improving learning outcomes, it can also be exploited for unethical gains. Understanding the mechanics of cognitive priming empowers us to recognize and mitigate its potential misuse, while also harnessing its potential for good. Being aware of these subtle influences allows us to become more conscious consumers, more discerning decision-makers, and ultimately, more aware of the forces shaping our own thoughts and behaviors. Word salad, the confusion tactic. Imagine someone speaking, words flowing effortlessly, sentences forming, or so it seems. But listen closer. The words are there, the grammar might even be correct at times, but the meaning disintegrates into a chaotic jumble. This, in its essence, is word salad. It's a communication technique, sometimes deliberate, sometimes not, designed to overwhelm and confuse the listener, essentially shutting down critical thought through sheer linguistic bombardment. The core mechanism behind word salad lies in the disconnect between syntax and semantics. Syntax, the grammatical structure of language, provides the framework. Semantics, on the other hand, is the meaning carried by the words themselves and their arrangement. Word salad often retains enough syntactical correctness to lull the listener into a false sense of comprehension, even as the semantic content veers wildly off course. The listener's brain, constantly striving to extract meaning, becomes overloaded with nonsensical combinations, leading to frustration, disorientation, and ultimately, a cessation of active listening. The application of word salad as a deliberate tactic hinges on exploiting this cognitive overload. Imagine a politician facing a difficult question. Instead of providing a direct answer, they launch into a seemingly eloquent, yet ultimately meaningless, monologue. They might weave together buzzwords, half-formed concepts, and disconnected anecdotes, creating a verbal smokescreen that obscures the original issue. The listener, struggling to decipher the barrage of information, is less likely to press for a genuine response. This is especially effective in environments where appearing intelligent or informed is paramount, as calling out the speaker's incoherence risks appearing ignorant oneself. However, word salad isn't always a calculated manipulation. It's a recognized symptom of several mental health conditions, most notably schizophrenia. In these cases, the individual isn't intentionally trying to deceive. Their thought processes are genuinely disordered, resulting in fragmented and illogical speech patterns. Differentiating between malicious word salad and that stemming from mental illness requires careful observation of context, behavior, and other accompanying symptoms. Is there a history of manipulation? Is the individual displaying other signs of cognitive impairment, such as disorganized thought or hallucinations? These are crucial considerations. The impact of word salad, whether intentional or unintentional, can be profound. On the receiving end, it breeds distrust, frustration, and a sense of powerlessness. Being subjected to a barrage of nonsensical language can leave one feeling mentally exhausted and questioning their own understanding. In professional settings, word salad can undermine credibility and damage communication channels. In personal relationships, it can create a barrier to intimacy and understanding. Consider a hypothetical example. A manager confronted about a failed project responds with, "Well, you see, the synergistic paradigms were clearly misaligned," leading to a cascade of suboptimal deliverables within the Q3 framework, notwithstanding the dynamic interplay of cross-functional stakeholders and the projected scalability of agile methodologies, impacting, of course, the overall bottom line regarding key performance indicators, which, as we all know, are crucial for maximizing shareholder value in a highly competitive landscape. So, frankly, the responsibility lies across the board, impacting everyone. The words individually might make sense. The syntax is relatively sound, but the collection of phrases conveys no clear explanation of the project's failure or assignment of responsibility. It's a masterful demonstration of obfuscation, designed to deflect blame and avoid accountability. The listener is left bewildered, potentially accepting the non-answer simply to avoid further engagement with the bewildering linguistic maze. Understanding the mechanics of word salad allows us to recognize it in its various forms, whether it's a deliberate attempt to mislead or a manifestation of underlying mental health concerns. This awareness empowers us to challenge its use, demand clarity, and protect ourselves from its potentially damaging effects. It forces us to critically evaluate the language we hear and the intent behind it, ensuring that communication remains a vehicle for understanding rather than a tool for manipulation. Moving the goalposts. The insidious shifting of standards after an achievement has already been met, ensuring the target is perpetually out of reach. It's a psychological manipulation tactic, often employed unconsciously, that traps individuals in a relentless cycle of striving, leaving them perpetually feeling inadequate despite tangible successes. The core mechanism revolves around subtly raising expectations once a previous benchmark has been attained. It's not a blatant denial of accomplishment. Instead, it's a recalibration of what constitutes good enough, often framed with seemingly reasonable justifications. Imagine a young aspiring artist, Sarah. She dreams of exhibiting her work at a prestigious local gallery. She pours her heart and soul into her paintings, meticulously honing her skills. Finally, she achieves her goal. The gallery accepts her pieces, and the opening night is a resounding success. Friends, family, and art critics shower her with praise. However, instead of celebrating, Sarah finds herself riddled with anxiety. Her mentor, a well-meaning but unknowingly manipulative figure, remarks, "This is wonderful, Sarah, but to truly make a name for yourself, you need to exhibit at the national level. Local recognition is just a stepping stone." The goalposts have shifted. Sarah's initial victory, the culmination of years of effort, is now diminished, relegated to a mere preliminary step. The feeling of accomplishment is fleeting, replaced by the daunting prospect of an even more demanding objective. The problem with moving the goalposts isn't simply about setting ambitious goals. Healthy ambition is driven by internal motivation and a desire for personal growth. Moving the goalposts, on the other hand, is fueled by external validation and a fear of inadequacy. It hinges on an unspoken, often unconscious, belief that one is never truly there, never quite enough. This can manifest in various ways. In the workplace, a manager might commend an employee for exceeding their sales quota, only to immediately raise the quota for the next quarter, without any significant change in market conditions or resources. The employee is left feeling perpetually under pressure, regardless of their performance. In relationships, it could involve constantly criticizing a partner for minor flaws, even after they've made significant efforts to improve. A partner who initially expressed a desire for more romantic gestures might, after receiving them, then complain that the gestures aren't thoughtful enough or personal enough, essentially dismissing the efforts already made. The impact of this tactic is profound. It erodes self-esteem, fuels anxiety and depression, and can lead to burnout. Individuals trapped in this cycle struggle to derive genuine satisfaction from their achievements because the finish line is constantly being pushed further away. They internalize the message that their efforts are never quite sufficient, fostering a deep-seated sense of worthlessness. The constant striving becomes a source of stress, not joy. Furthermore, Moving the goalposts creates a power dynamic. The person shifting the goalposts maintains control by setting the standards and judging the individual's performance against those ever-changing standards. This can be particularly damaging in hierarchical relationships, such as parent-child or employer-employee dynamics. Breaking free from this cycle requires recognizing the pattern. It involves consciously evaluating whether the new expectations are reasonable and achievable, or if they're simply a manifestation of someone else's, or one's own internalized insecurities. It requires learning to celebrate achievements, to savor the feeling of accomplishment before immediately setting a new, potentially unattainable goal. It means prioritizing intrinsic motivation over external validation and defining success on one's own terms. It's about drawing a line in the sand and declaring, "This is enough. I am enough." Blame shifting. Passing the buck of responsibility. It's a manipulation tactic as old as time, a psychological dodgeball where accountability is the ball and the shifters desperately try to avoid being hit. At its core, blame shifting is the art of redirecting responsibility for a mistake, failure, or undesirable outcome onto someone else, regardless of whether that someone else is actually at fault. It's not merely denying responsibility, it's actively transferring it. The mechanism behind blame shifting is often complex and layered with self-preservation instincts. Fear of punishment, social disapproval, or damage to one's self-image fuels the urge to deflect blame. Sometimes it's a conscious, calculated strategy. Other times, it's a more subconscious defense mechanism, a knee-jerk reaction designed to protect the ego. Regardless of the intent, the effect remains the same. Someone else bears the burden. Several techniques are employed in the blame shifter's arsenal. One common approach is outright denial, coupled with accusation. "I didn't do it, and even if I did, it's because you told me to." This shifts the focus from the shifter's actions to the alleged instigation or incompetence of the target. Another tactic involves minimizing one's own role while exaggerating the contributions or failings of others. "Yes, I was involved, but it was only a small part. The entire project failed because of their poor planning." This carefully crafted narrative paints the shifter as a minor player, absolving them of significant responsibility. A subtler form of blame shifting involves reframing the narrative. Instead of directly accusing someone, the shifter subtly alters the perception of events to place them in a more favorable light. For example, a manager might say, "The sales figures are down this quarter, but that's because the marketing team didn't generate enough leads." While not directly accusing the sales team, the statement subtly implies that their performance is not the primary cause of the problem. Another technique is to use scapegoating, identifying a convenient individual or group to shoulder the blame regardless of their actual involvement. This is commonly seen in hierarchical systems, where those at the bottom are often made to answer for the mistakes of those at the top. The impact of blame shifting can be devastating, both on an individual and organizational level. On a personal level, the target of blame shifting experiences feelings of anger, resentment, and injustice. Their reputation may be damaged, their confidence eroded, and their relationships strained. In extreme cases, constant blame shifting can lead to anxiety, depression, and a sense of learned helplessness. Consider a scenario where a child consistently blames their sibling for their own misdeeds. Over time, the sibling may begin to internalize this blame, developing a negative self-image and a belief that they are inherently flawed. In the workplace, blame shifting creates a toxic environment of distrust and fear. Employees are reluctant to take risks or admit mistakes, fearing they will be scapegoated. Innovation is stifled, collaboration breaks down, and morale plummets. When accountability is absent, problems are rarely addressed effectively, leading to repeated failures and a decline in overall performance. If a company consistently blames external factors, e.g., the economy, competitors, for its problems instead of addressing internal issues, it will be unable to adapt and improve. Ultimately, blame shifting is a corrosive force that undermines trust, erodes accountability, and hinders growth. Recognizing the tactics employed by blame shifters and understanding the psychological mechanisms that drive this behavior is crucial for protecting oneself and fostering a culture of responsibility and ownership. Hoovering. The name itself evokes a sense of relentless suction, a vacuum relentlessly trying to pull something, or rather, someone back into its grasp. And that's precisely what it is. A manipulation tactic employed by individuals, often those with narcissistic or manipulative tendencies, to reel a former target back into a relationship they've previously escaped or been discarded from. Think of a vacuum cleaner tirelessly circling a speck of dust, refusing to let it settle. That's the essence of hoovering. It's not necessarily about genuine remorse or a sudden change of heart. It's about control. It's about proving they still have influence over you, that they can still elicit a response, that you're still within their orbit. The mechanisms of hoovering are varied and often insidious. They can range from seemingly innocuous messages, a casual, "How are you?" or a reminiscing about a shared memory, to more dramatic displays. These might involve feigned illness, fabricated emergencies, or even reaching out to mutual friends to relay messages of regret or longing. The key is to exploit any remaining emotional vulnerability to poke at the wounds that haven't fully healed. Why does it work? Because even after extracting yourself from a toxic relationship, remnants of emotional connection often linger. Hope, however misguided, might still flicker. The victim might remember the good times, downplaying the abuse or trauma they endured. They might feel guilt, believing they somehow contributed to the relationship's demise. Hoovering preys on this vulnerability. Imagine this scenario. Sarah finally breaks free from a relationship with Mark, a man who consistently undermined her confidence and isolated her from her friends. After months of agonizing self-doubt and emotional manipulation, she manages to cut contact. She starts rebuilding her life, rediscovering her passions, and reconnecting with loved ones. Just as she starts to feel a sense of normalcy, a text message arrives. "I know I messed up, Sarah. I've been going to therapy. I'm a changed man. Can we just talk?" This is classic hoovering. Mark is attempting to re-establish contact, to exploit Sarah's potential empathy and hope for reconciliation. Another example might be a situation where someone threatens self-harm if the target doesn't return. This is an extremely manipulative and dangerous form of hoovering, leveraging the victim's fear and sense of responsibility. Or perhaps the abuser begins spreading rumors and lies about the target, aiming to damage their reputation and isolate them, making them more vulnerable and likely to seek solace, however misguided, in the arms of their abuser. The impact of successful hoovering can be devastating. It throws the victim back into the cycle of abuse, reinforcing the manipulator's control and eroding their self-worth. It can undo months, even years, of healing and self-discovery. Each successful hoovering attempt strengthens the abuser's belief in their power and makes it even harder for the victim to break free in the future. It is a reinforcement of the victim's belief that they are somehow responsible or that they can fix the abuser, a dangerous illusion that perpetuates the cycle. Recognizing hoovering is the first step in resisting it. Understanding that these attempts at contact are not driven by genuine remorse, but by a desire for control is crucial. Setting firm boundaries, cutting off all communication, and seeking support from friends, family, or a therapist are essential strategies for protecting yourself and maintaining your hard-won freedom. Consider a romantic relationship as a prime example. An individual, perhaps with a history of infidelity or commitment issues, might declare they've changed, promising marriage, a house in the suburbs, and children. They might even go into excruciating detail, describing the nursery decor or the kind of dog they'll get. This elaborate fantasy isn't intended as a genuine expression of future intention. Instead, it's a tactical play designed to dissuade the other person from leaving or from demanding actual behavioral change in the present. It offers the illusion of security and progress while allowing the manipulator to continue their problematic behaviors unchecked. The impact of future faking can be devastating. It creates a profound sense of betrayal and disillusionment when a promised future inevitably fails to materialize. The victim may have made significant sacrifices based on these false promises, investing emotional energy, time, and even financial resources into a relationship or situation that was fundamentally fraudulent. They might have turned down other opportunities, isolated themselves from supportive relationships, or compromised their own values in anticipation of the promised future. The insidious nature of future faking lies in its ability to erode the victim's sense of reality. Over time, the disparity between the idealized future and the bleak present can create cognitive dissonance, leading the victim to question their own perceptions and judgment. They might rationalize the manipulator's behavior, clinging to the hope that the promised future is still attainable, even in the face of mounting evidence to the contrary. This can create a cycle of dependency and manipulation, where the victim remains trapped in the relationship, desperately seeking validation and reassurance that never comes. Future faking isn't limited to romantic relationships. It can occur in professional settings, where a boss might promise a promotion or a raise that never materializes, or in familial relationships, where a parent might promise financial assistance or emotional support that is consistently withheld. The common thread is the use of future promises as a tool to control and manipulate another person's behavior in the present. The promises act as dangling carrots, keeping the victim engaged and compliant, while the manipulator avoids accountability for their actions. Recognizing the pattern of future faking is crucial for protecting oneself from its damaging consequences. It demands a careful assessment of behavior versus words, and a willingness to confront the painful reality that the promised future may be nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion. Gaslighting and memory manipulation represent a particularly insidious form of psychological abuse. It's not simply about lying. It's about systematically eroding a person's grasp on reality, making them question their sanity and their ability to trust their own memories. The ultimate goal is control, achieved by destabilizing the victim's self-perception. At its core, gaslighting involves a persistent denial of the victim's experiences. It starts subtly, perhaps with the abuser dismissing their feelings. You're overreacting, or you're too sensitive. This seeds doubt. Over time, the gaslighter escalates, actively denying things that happened, distorting events, and outright fabricating incidents. They might say, "That never happened," even when confronted with undeniable proof, or claim, "You're remembering it wrong." The mechanism behind this manipulation is multi-layered. Firstly, the gaslighter isolates the victim, often subtly discouraging them from seeking external validation. This could involve creating conflict with friends and family, poisoning relationships with gossip, or simply monopolizing their time, making it difficult for the victim to maintain outside perspectives. Isolated, the victim becomes increasingly reliant on the gaslighter's version of reality. Secondly, gaslighting leverages the victim's inherent desire to believe and trust. Most people enter relationships with a baseline assumption of good faith. The gaslighter exploits this, initially presenting themselves as reasonable and trustworthy. This makes the victim more likely to accept their subtle distortions, especially if the gaslighter frames their narrative as being for your own good. Memory manipulation is the sharpest edge of gaslighting. It goes beyond simply denying an event. It actively replaces the victim's memory with a false one. For example, imagine someone confides in their partner about a past trauma. A gaslighting partner might initially feign empathy, but then subtly begin to plant seeds of doubt about the accuracy of the victim's recollection. "Are you sure that's how it happened? You were so young. Your memory could be unreliable." Over time, they might introduce alternative, self-serving narratives, effectively rewriting the victim's personal history. Maybe you misinterpreted his intentions, or perhaps you're exaggerating the severity of the situation. A hypothetical, but illustrative example. A woman, Sarah, is consistently told by her husband, Mark, that she forgets things. He misplaces her keys, then insists she was the one who put them there. He makes plans and then denies making them. making Sarah feel confused and unreliable. He'll say things like, "You're always losing things. I have to take care of everything." Then, Mark begins to subtly alter Sarah's memories of past events, claiming she acted irrationally at a party, even though she has a clear recollection of being calm and collected. He might even involve other people, asking them leading questions designed to reinforce his fabricated version of events. Over time, Sarah begins to doubt her own sanity and starts to rely entirely on Mark's perception of reality. This makes her increasingly vulnerable and dependent. The impact of gaslighting and memory manipulation can be devastating. Victims often experience anxiety, depression, confusion, and a profound loss of self-worth. They may develop a deep-seated fear of making decisions, trusting their instincts, or expressing their opinions. The erosion of their sense of self can lead to social isolation, professional setbacks, and even suicidal ideation. Rebuilding trust in themselves and others after experiencing gaslighting is a long and arduous process, often requiring professional therapy. Understanding the mechanics of this insidious form of abuse is crucial for both identifying it in our own lives and helping others who may be victims. Scapegoating, the convenient target. It's a deeply ingrained human tendency, a psychological mechanism where blame for problems, frustrations, or failures is directed towards an individual or group, regardless of their actual culpability. Think of it as a psychological pressure valve, releasing pin-up anxieties and deflecting responsibility away from the true sources of the issue. It's a dangerous shortcut, trading genuine problem-solving for the temporary comfort of a designated villain. The core of scapegoating lies in the need to alleviate cognitive dissonance. When confronted with negative outcomes, especially collective ones, individuals experience discomfort, the dissonance between their desire for positive results and the reality of failure. Accepting responsibility, analyzing complex causes, and implementing difficult solutions are challenging and often require acknowledging one's own shortcomings. Scapegoating offers a far simpler, albeit unethical, escape. By identifying a target, blame is externalized, the feeling of discomfort is reduced, and the illusion of control is restored. It's not our fault, it's their fault. The mechanisms at play are multifaceted. Prejudice and pre-existing biases often pave the way. Groups already marginalized or viewed with suspicion are prime candidates. The scapegoat doesn't necessarily have to be guilty. They simply need to be perceived as different, weak, or a convenient symbol of the problem. This pre-existing negativity acts as a confirmation bias, leading people to selectively notice and interpret information in a way that reinforces the scapegoat's supposed guilt. Another key element is group dynamics. In situations of collective stress or crisis, the pressure to conform increases. Challenging the scapegoating narrative risks ostracism, making individuals hesitant to speak out even if they recognize the injustice. This creates a self-perpetuating cycle of blame, as the scapegoat becomes increasingly isolated and vulnerable. The dynamic often empowers a vocal minority to drive a narrative, as others passively accept or even actively participate to avoid becoming the next target. Examples abound, both historically and in contemporary society. Consider a company facing financial difficulties. Instead of honestly assessing flawed business strategies or poor leadership, the blame might be shifted onto a specific department, a particular employee, or even a recent policy change. The scapegoated entity becomes the fall guy, absorbing the criticism and allowing others to avoid scrutiny. The actual problems remain unaddressed, and the underlying issues fester, potentially leading to further failures. On a larger scale, scapegoating is often seen during times of economic hardship or social unrest. Immigrant communities, for instance, are frequently targeted with accusations of stealing jobs or draining resources, diverting attention from systemic inequalities and complex economic factors. This not only perpetuates harmful stereotypes and discrimination, but also hinders the development of effective solutions to the actual problems facing society. The focus is diverted from addressing the root causes of poverty or unemployment instead focusing on perceived external threats embodied by the scapegoated group. The impact of scapegoating is devastating. For the targeted individual or group, it results in unfair blame, social isolation, discrimination, and often severe psychological distress. It can erode their self-esteem, sense of belonging, and overall well-being. Furthermore, scapegoating undermines trust within communities and organizations, creating a climate of fear and suspicion. Most significantly, it prevents genuine problem-solving. By focusing on a false cause, the real issues are ignored, and the underlying problems remain unresolved, potentially worsening over time. This makes recognizing and actively combating scapegoating crucial for fostering healthy, equitable, and resilient societies. Creating a false sense of urgency, often referred to as the pressure cooker, is a potent psychological manipulation technique that preys on our innate aversion to loss and desire for gain. It involves artificially inflating the perceived importance of immediate action, overriding rational decision-making processes, and coercing individuals into making choices they might otherwise reconsider. At its core, the pressure cooker exploits the principles of scarcity and loss aversion. Scarcity suggests that things perceived as limited become more desirable. Loss aversion, a cornerstone of behavioral economics, highlights the fact that we feel the pain of a loss more intensely than the pleasure of an equivalent gain. When these two forces converge under the banner of act now or miss out, the psychological pressure can be immense. The mechanism of the pressure cooker typically unfolds in several predictable stages. First, the manipulator creates a perceived limited window of opportunity. This can manifest as a limited time offer, a dwindling supply, or a threat of imminent price increase. Phrases like limited stock available, offer ends tonight, or prices rising soon are classic indicators. Second, the manipulator amplifies the potential negative consequences of an action. They paint a vivid picture of what the target will lose if they fail to act immediately. This could be missing out on a significant discount, losing access to a valuable resource, or suffering some other form of detriment. The emphasis shifts from the potential gain of acting to the potential loss of not acting. Third, the manipulator minimizes the time available for deliberation. They deliberately truncate the decision-making process, making it difficult for the target to gather information, compare alternatives, or seek advice. This can involve creating distractions, interrupting inquiries, or simply rushing the target through the process. The goal is to prevent rational analysis and encourage impulsive action. Consider a hypothetical scenario. A door-to-door salesperson arrives offering exclusive home improvement services. They claim that because a crew is already working in the neighborhood, they can offer a significantly reduced price, but only if the homeowner signs a contract within the next hour. They emphasize that this is a one-time opportunity and that the price will double if they return later. They might even create social proof by pointing to other satisfied customers in the area. The homeowner, feeling rushed and fearing the loss of a significant discount, might succumb to the pressure and sign the contract without properly researching the company or obtaining alternative quotes. This is a textbook example of the pressure cooker in action. The impact of this technique can be significant. It can lead to poor financial decisions, impulsive purchases, compromised personal boundaries, and even feelings of regret, anxiety, and anger. Furthermore, because the decision is made under duress, the target may later feel exploited and resentful towards the manipulator. The pressure cooker isn't limited to sales tactics. It can be employed in interpersonal relationships to manipulate someone into making a quick commitment or divulging information they wouldn't normally share. A manipulative partner might claim they're about to lose it if they don't receive an immediate answer about the future of the relationship, forcing the other partner to make a premature decision. Similarly, in negotiation settings, creating a deadline to force an opponent to quickly concede ground is a common, albeit ethically questionable, tactic. Recognizing the signs of the pressure cooker is crucial for protecting oneself. Be wary of any situation where you feel rushed, pressured, or unduly influenced by the fear of missing out. Take a step back, seek objective information, and resist the urge to make a decision without careful consideration. Remember, a legitimate opportunity will still be available after you've had time to properly evaluate it. Playing the martyr, suffering for attention. At its core, it's a manipulative strategy, often unconscious, where an individual positions themselves as a perpetual victim to garner sympathy, validation, and control. It's about exploiting the inherent human compassion for suffering, weaponizing vulnerability to navigate social dynamics. The martyr isn't necessarily fabricating hardship, but they are amplifying it, highlighting their sacrifices and perpetually reminding others of their perceived burdens. The mechanism behind this behavior is complex, rooted in deep-seated needs for attention and validation. Often, individuals who play the martyr have experienced neglect, a lack of emotional support, or even trauma in their past. Consequently, they learn that exhibiting suffering is the most reliable way to attract the care they crave. It becomes a learned pattern, a coping mechanism, however maladaptive. Think of the office worker, Sarah, who constantly laments about her overflowing workload. While everyone is busy, Sarah goes above and beyond to showcase her exhaustion, making sure everyone knows she stayed late, skipped lunch, and is single-handedly keeping the department afloat. She might accept additional tasks, not out of genuine altruism, but to further solidify her position as the indispensable, suffering employee. This isn't about efficient work. It's about theatrical performance, designed to elicit praise and acknowledgement. Or consider a parent who constantly reminds their children of all the sacrifices they've made. I gave up my dreams for you. Or after all I've done, this is how you repay me? These phrases are not simply expressions of frustration. They are calculated attempts to instill guilt and control behavior. The child is then pressured to conform, not out of love or respect, but out of a desire to alleviate the parent's perceived suffering. The martyr parent effectively weaponizes their past choices to manipulate the present. The martyr often displays a selective memory, focusing on past injustices and perceived slights while conveniently forgetting any positive experiences or support they received. They might exaggerate the severity of their problems, blowing minor inconveniences out of proportion to maintain their victim status. They also tend to resist genuine help or solutions, because solving the problem would dismantle their carefully constructed narrative. Receiving actual support threatens their identity as the suffering soul. The impact of playing the martyr can be devastating on relationships. Those around the martyr often feel emotionally drained, manipulated, and resentful. Constantly being subjected to complaints and guilt trips erodes empathy and creates a toxic environment. Over time, friends and family may distance themselves, unable to cope with the constant negativity and emotional burden. The martyr, ironically, may then interpret this distancing as further proof of their victimhood, reinforcing their behavior in a self-fulfilling prophecy. Furthermore, playing the martyr prevents genuine self-reflection and personal growth. By focusing on external validation and blaming others for their problems, the individual avoids taking responsibility for their own actions and choices. They remain stuck in a cycle of suffering, unable to break free and build healthy, reciprocal relationships. Their focus remains outward, seeking sympathy rather than inward, seeking solutions. Recognizing this behavior, both in oneself and others, is crucial. If you suspect you're playing the martyr, exploring the underlying need for attention and validation through therapy can be incredibly beneficial. Learning to express needs directly, developing healthy coping mechanisms, and practicing self-compassion are essential steps towards breaking free from this destructive pattern. If you're dealing with someone who plays the martyr, setting boundaries, refusing to engage in guilt trips, and encouraging them to seek professional help are crucial for protecting your own emotional well-being. The key is to acknowledge the manipulative nature of the behavior without necessarily demonizing the individual, understanding that it often stems from deep-seated insecurity and unmet needs. The power of suggestion. It's a subtle art, a delicate dance of influence where we subtly steer another person's thoughts, feelings, and even behaviors without them realizing the extent of our intervention. Think of it as planting a seed in fertile ground, the seed of an idea, a belief, or desire. If nurtured correctly, that seed can blossom into a fully formed conviction, driving action seemingly born of the individual's own volition. At its core, suggestion works by bypassing the conscious, critical thinking processes of the mind and accessing the subconscious. This is where our deeply held beliefs, ingrained habits, and emotional responses reside. By targeting this subconscious level, we can circumvent rational objections and make our suggestions more readily accepted. The mechanism involves leveraging several psychological principles. Priming, for instance, is a key technique. By exposing someone to certain stimuli, we can subtly influence their subsequent thoughts and actions. Imagine showing someone a series of images related to travel, beaches, exotic foods, maps. This seemingly innocuous exposure can increase their susceptibility to suggestions about taking a vacation, even if they hadn't consciously considered it before. The travel imagery acted as a prime, preparing their mind to be receptive to the idea of travel. Another vital element is authority and credibility. We're more likely to accept suggestions from individuals we perceive as knowledgeable, trustworthy, or powerful. This explains the effectiveness of celebrity endorsements in advertising or the impact of a doctor's recommendation. The perceived authority figure provides a level of validation that diminishes our resistance. Framing also plays a crucial role. The way we present information can significantly alter its perceived impact. Instead of saying, "There's a 20% chance of failure," phrasing it as "there's an 80% chance of success" paints a more positive picture and increases the likelihood of acceptance. The underlying information remains the same, but the framing influences our emotional response and our willingness to embrace the proposition. Real-world examples of suggestion are abundant. Consider the placebo effect in medicine. Patients who believe they're receiving a real treatment, even if they're only given a sugar pill, often experience genuine improvements in their condition. This isn't merely wishful thinking. The power of suggestion triggers physiological changes in the body, demonstrating the profound connection between mind and matter. In marketing, suggestion is a cornerstone technique. Advertisers carefully craft messages that subtly associate their products with desirable emotions and outcomes: happiness, success, attractiveness. They might not explicitly state that their product will make you happier, but the imagery and storytelling subtly plant that seed in your mind. Hypothetically, consider a scenario where a team leader wants to subtly encourage innovation within their group. Instead of directly ordering people to be more creative, they might start by decorating the office space with inspiring artwork and quotes from famous innovators. They might also share articles and podcasts about groundbreaking discoveries during team meetings. Slowly, consistently, they're planting seeds of creativity and innovation, creating an environment conducive to new ideas without ever explicitly dictating them. The impact of successful suggestion can be profound. It can shape opinions, influence decisions, and even alter behaviors. While suggestion can be used for benevolent purposes, such as promoting positive habits or boosting confidence, it's essential to acknowledge its potential for manipulation. Being aware of these techniques can help us become more discerning and protect ourselves from unwanted influence, while also allowing us to use the power of suggestion responsibly in our interactions with others. It is about understanding the fertile ground of the mind and cultivating positive growth, rather than sowing seeds of doubt or discord. Cognitive biases. They're the brain's built-in shortcuts, the mental algorithms that allow us to make rapid judgments and decisions in a complex world. But these very shortcuts, designed for efficiency, can be systematically exploited. Understanding how they work is paramount to recognizing when we're being manipulated. At their core, cognitive biases represent deviations from rational judgment. They arise from our limited processing capacity, reliance on heuristics, mental rules of thumb, and emotional influences. Think of it like this. Our brains are constantly bombarded with information. To avoid overload, we filter, categorize, and simplify, often unconsciously. This simplification, while generally helpful, opens us up to predictable errors in thinking. One incredibly prevalent bias is the availability heuristic. We tend to overestimate the likelihood of events that are easily recalled, often because they are vivid, recent, or emotionally charged. Media coverage frequently amplifies this effect. If news outlets are saturated with stories about shark attacks, people will overestimate the risk of being attacked by a shark, even though statistically, it's far more likely they'll be struck by lightning. A manipulator might exploit this by constantly highlighting negative or positive aspects of a particular choice, thereby biasing your perception of its true risk or reward. Another powerful bias is anchoring. When making decisions, we often rely too heavily on the first piece of information offered, the anchor, even if it's irrelevant. A classic example is in pricing. If a product is initially advertised at $500 and then discounted to $250, it seems like a great deal, even if the actual value is closer to $200. The initial $500 price serves as an anchor, making the discounted price appear more attractive. In negotiations, setting the initial offer high or low, depending on your position, can significantly influence the final outcome. The confirmation bias is equally insidious. We have a natural tendency to seek out and interpret information that confirms our existing beliefs, while ignoring or downplaying evidence that contradicts them. This is why people can hold stubbornly to opposing viewpoints, even when presented with the same facts. Political campaigns exploit this bias relentlessly, tailoring their messages to resonate with specific demographics and reinforcing their pre-existing beliefs. It also explains the proliferation of echo chambers online, where individuals are primarily exposed to information that validates their perspectives, further solidifying their biases. Framing effects demonstrate that how information is presented can dramatically alter our choices. A medical treatment described as having a 90% survival rate is perceived more favorably than one described as having a 10% mortality rate, even though they are statistically equivalent. Manipulators can use framing to sway opinions by emphasizing positive aspects or downplaying negative ones, even if the underlying information remains the same. The bandwagon effect plays on our desire to conform. We're more likely to adopt a belief or behavior if we perceive that many other people are doing the same. This is why testimonials and bestseller labels are so effective. It's not necessarily because the product is superior, but because the perceived popularity creates a sense of social proof. Cults and propaganda often leverage the bandwagon effect to create a sense of unity and encourage conformity. Understanding these and many other cognitive biases is the first step toward mitigating their influence. Being aware of our mental shortcuts allows us to critically evaluate information, challenge our assumptions, and make more rational decisions. While we can never completely eliminate bias, recognizing its potential presence empowers us to resist manipulation and navigate the complexities of the world with greater awareness. Creating dependency is a subtle, insidious form of psychological manipulation. It's the art of weaving a web where another person comes to rely on you, not for genuine support and reciprocal care, but for validation, resources, or even their basic sense of self-worth. The manipulator, the puppet master, strategically positions themselves as indispensable, slowly eroding the target's autonomy and self-sufficiency. At its core, creating dependency relies on exploiting vulnerabilities. These vulnerabilities might stem from insecurity, past trauma, a lack of self-esteem, or even simple naivete. The manipulator identifies these weaknesses and then carefully constructs a narrative where they are the only ones who can truly understand, protect, or provide what the target needs. The mechanisms employed are varied and often masked by seemingly benevolent actions. One common tactic is overhelping. Instead of empowering someone to solve their own problems, the manipulator swoops in to fix everything, effectively disabling the target's ability to learn and grow. For example, A controlling parent might constantly do their adult child's laundry, manage their finances, and make their decisions, ostensibly to help, but ultimately preventing them from developing independent living skills. Another key strategy is withholding resources or affection. This can be done subtly, through conditional approval or strategically timed silences. The target learns that their access to emotional support, financial security, or even basic necessities is contingent on pleasing the manipulator. This creates a climate of constant anxiety and a desperate need for the manipulator's approval. Imagine a partner who consistently withdraws affection after disagreements, making the other partner feel they need to constantly walk on eggshells to maintain the relationship. Gaslighting, a common tool in the manipulator's arsenal, further reinforces dependency. By distorting reality, questioning the target's memory and sanity, the manipulator undermines their confidence in their own perceptions. This makes the target increasingly reliant on the manipulator's version of events, solidifying their control. You're imagining things, or that never happened, repeated enough, can lead someone to doubt their own sanity and turn to the manipulator for clarity. The impact of created dependency is profound. The target experiences a gradual erosion of their self-esteem and autonomy. They may become isolated from friends and family, as the manipulator subtly discourages outside relationships, further cementing their control. Decision-making becomes paralyzed by fear of displeasing the manipulator. Over time, the target's sense of self becomes intertwined with the manipulator's approval, creating a profound sense of powerlessness. Hypothetically, consider a workplace scenario. A new employee, eager to impress, is quickly taken under the wing of a seemingly experienced colleague. The colleague readily offers help, handling complex tasks and protecting the new employee from criticism. Initially, this seems like a blessing. However, the colleague begins to subtly undermine the new employee's confidence, pointing out minor flaws and making them question their abilities. Soon, the new employee is completely reliant on the colleague for guidance and validation, even for simple tasks. The colleague then uses this dependency to manipulate the new employee, assigning them unwanted tasks and taking credit for their work. The new employee, fearing disapproval and feeling incapable of independent action, complies without question. They have effectively become a puppet on the colleague's strings. Breaking free from this type of dependency requires recognizing the pattern of manipulation, rebuilding self-esteem, and establishing clear boundaries. It is a challenging process, often requiring external support from therapists or trusted friends and family, as the grip of the puppet master can be incredibly strong and deeply ingrained. Pathological lying, also known as mythomania or pseudologia fantastica, isn't just an occasional white lie to spare someone's feelings. It's a chronic behavior characterized by compulsive lying, often without a clear external motivation or benefit. These aren't calculated deceptions for personal gain in the traditional sense. Rather, they're often elaborate and fantastical narratives spun seemingly for the sheer act of fabrication. At its core, pathological lying is about creating an alternate reality, a meticulously crafted tapestry of falsehoods that can become incredibly intricate and difficult to untangle. Unlike a sociopath who lies to manipulate or a con artist who lies for profit, the pathological liar often seems to lie for the sake of lying itself. There might be an underlying psychological need being met, such as seeking attention, admiration, or a perceived sense of control, but the primary driver isn't always readily apparent. The mechanisms behind this behavior are complex and not fully understood. Some theories point to childhood trauma or neglect, where lying became a survival mechanism, a way to cope with difficult circumstances or to create a more desirable persona. Others suggest a potential neurological component, citing studies that have found subtle differences in brain structure and function between pathological liars and non-liars. Specifically, studies suggest increased white matter in the prefrontal cortex, the area associated with higher-level cognitive functions like planning and decision-making. This could potentially facilitate the generation and maintenance of complex lies. Consider, for example, a person who consistently embellishes their professional accomplishments, claiming to have spearheaded major projects that they were only tangentially involved in, or fabricating entire positions they never held. They might weave incredibly detailed stories about these fictional achievements, complete with specific dates, names, and circumstances. While superficially it might seem like they're trying to advance their career, often there's no direct, tangible benefit derived from these lies. They might simply crave the perceived respect and admiration that comes with these fabricated accomplishments. Another example could involve someone constantly exaggerating or inventing illnesses, detailing elaborate symptoms and treatment regimens that are entirely untrue. They might visit multiple doctors, undergoing unnecessary tests, all to maintain the facade of being seriously ill. Again, the motivation isn't necessarily to gain sympathy or disability benefits. It could be a deeper need for attention and care, a distorted way of fulfilling unmet emotional needs. The impact of pathological lying can be devastating, not only for the liar, but also for those around them. Relationships are eroded by distrust and suspicion. Family members and friends may feel betrayed and manipulated. The liar themselves may experience feelings of guilt, shame, and isolation, though they often lack the insight to recognize the true extent of their behavior. Furthermore, the constant maintenance of the lies can become incredibly stressful and emotionally draining. The web of deceit becomes a prison, trapping the liar in their own fabricated reality. It's important to distinguish pathological lying from other forms of deception. While all lying involves intentional misrepresentation, pathological lying stands apart due to its compulsive nature, lack of clear motivation, and tendency to create elaborate and fantastical narratives. It's a complex psychological phenomenon that requires careful assessment and often professional intervention. Feigned ignorance, or the innocent facade, is a particularly insidious psychological maneuver where someone deliberately acts unaware or uninformed to manipulate a situation or gain an advantage. It's the calculated performance of naivete, a strategic dumbing down of oneself designed to disarm, mislead, or provoke a specific reaction from others. The core of this tactic lies in creating a disparity between perceived knowledge and actual knowledge. The individual employing feigned ignorance possesses information, but consciously chooses to present themselves as lacking it. This discrepancy is the key to its manipulative power. By appearing harmlessly uninformed, they can circumvent suspicion, elicit explanations they already know, confirming suspicions or gathering further details, or deflect responsibility for their actions. The mechanism works on several psychological principles. Firstly, it leverages the natural human inclination to correct perceived errors or educate the uninformed. People are often inclined to explain things, particularly when they believe someone is genuinely confused or unaware. The manipulator, under the guise of innocence, prompts this explanatory response, gaining insight or steering the conversation in a desired direction. Secondly, feigned ignorance exploits assumptions about competence and intent. When someone appears ignorant, they are often perceived as less threatening or less capable. This can lead targets to lower their guard, revealing information they might otherwise keep hidden or underestimating the manipulator's true abilities and intentions. Consider a classic example: a politician questioned about a controversial policy. Instead of directly defending or denying involvement, they might respond with something like, "Oh, that policy? I'm not entirely sure I'm up to speed on the specifics. Could you remind me what it entails?" This seemingly innocent request accomplishes several things. It buys them time to formulate a response, allows them to gauge the interviewer's understanding and perspective, and creates an opportunity to shape the narrative later by appearing to be merely echoing the explanation they were just given. They are not explicitly lying, but using the appearance of ignorance to subtly control the interaction. Another example can be found in everyday workplace dynamics. Imagine an employee who intentionally fails to understand instructions, repeatedly asking for clarification or simplification. This might be a genuine misunderstanding, but could also be a calculated tactic to avoid responsibility for a complex task or to burden a colleague with extra work. By playing the role of the incompetent novice, they deflect accountability and shift the workload onto someone else. The impact of feigned ignorance can be significant. It can erode trust, create frustration, and ultimately distort reality. The target may feel manipulated and resentful, even if they can't pinpoint exactly what happened. The constant need to explain or clarify can be draining and time-consuming, diverting resources and energy from more productive endeavors. Furthermore, the long-term use of this tactic can create a climate of suspicion and paranoia, as people become wary of the apparent innocence of others. The manipulator also benefits. They gather information, deflect blame, and exert control over the situation. However, the constant performance of naivete can take its toll. It requires careful attention to detail and a consistent commitment to the facade. Over time, it can also lead to a distorted sense of self, as the manipulator becomes increasingly reliant on deception as a means of navigating the world. Furthermore, if the feigned ignorance is exposed, the consequences can be severe, leading to loss of credibility and damaged relationships. The innocent facade can crumble, revealing the calculating individual beneath. The double bind. It's a psychological trap, a no-win scenario meticulously constructed to induce confusion, distress, and ultimately, a breakdown in communication and self-perception. At its core, it's a conflict between two or more messages, where one message negates the other, leaving the recipient feeling utterly paralyzed. Think of it as a meticulously crafted maze with only dead ends. The key is the inherent contradiction. It's not just about receiving conflicting instructions. It's about the impossibility of fulfilling both simultaneously. Imagine a parent who constantly criticizes their child for being clingy and demanding, yet simultaneously punishes them for seeking independence. The child is caught. If they seek affection, they're deemed needy and suffocated. If they attempt autonomy, they are accused of being cold and ungrateful. There is no escape. They are damned if they do, and damned if they don't. Several crucial elements constitute a true double bind. Firstly, there must be two or more individuals involved, forming a significant relationship where power dynamics are often skewed. The originator of the double bind usually holds a position of authority or emotional importance, making the recipient vulnerable and less likely to challenge the conflicting messages directly. Secondly, two or more contradictory messages are delivered, often on different levels. One message might be verbal, explicit, and direct, while the other is nonverbal, implicit, and perhaps even unconscious. For example, a person might say, "I want you to be independent and make your own decisions," while their tone of voice, body language, and subsequent actions convey disapproval and control. The recipient picks up on both messages, creating a sense of cognitive dissonance and uncertainty. Thirdly, the recipient is unable to comment on the contradiction, to metacommunicate about it. This is a crucial aspect. The person trapped in the double bind is prevented from pointing out the inherent flaw in the communication, often through fear of reprisal or a complex web of emotional manipulation. Any attempt to question the contradiction is met with denial, defensiveness, or further manipulation, solidifying the trap. Finally, the double bind becomes a learned pattern. Repeated exposure to these contradictory messages internalizes the conflict. The individual starts to anticipate the impossibility of pleasing the other person, leading to anxiety, confusion, and a distorted sense of self. They may develop coping mechanisms, such as withdrawal, passive aggression, or a complete shutdown of communication, all of which further reinforce the dysfunctional dynamic. The impact of chronic exposure to double binds can be devastating. It can lead to feelings of helplessness, inadequacy, and a profound sense of disorientation. Individuals may struggle with self-doubt, difficulty making decisions, and an impaired ability to form healthy relationships. In severe cases, it has been linked to the development of mental health conditions like schizophrenia, although this is a controversial and overly simplistic interpretation. Imagine a workplace scenario. A manager tells an employee, "I want you to be innovative and take risks," but then micromanages every aspect of their work, criticizes any deviation from the norm, and punishes perceived failures. The employee is caught in a double bind. They are expected to be creative, yet simultaneously discouraged from actually acting on their ideas. The result is likely to be a demoralized, anxious employee who feels trapped and unable to succeed. The double bind is a subtle yet insidious form of psychological manipulation, a carefully constructed prison of communication that can have profound and lasting consequences. Recognizing its components and understanding its impact is the first step towards breaking free from its grasp. The seed of doubt, injecting uncertainty, is a manipulative tactic rooted in subtly undermining another person's confidence in their beliefs, memories, decisions, or perceptions. It's not about outright denial or aggressive contradiction. It's about carefully planting a tiny seed of uncertainty that, over time, can blossom in a significant self-doubt and dependence on the manipulator. The core mechanism lies in exploiting the inherent human vulnerability of questioning ourselves. We all doubt our memories, sometimes second-guess decisions, or wonder if we perceive something correctly. The manipulator preys on this existing tendency, amplifying it through subtle suggestions and carefully worded questions. Context is crucial. The seed is most likely to germinate in environments of trust or authority. A partner, a parent, a boss, or a charismatic leader. These individuals often hold a privileged position where their words carry extra weight. This perceived credibility makes the victim more susceptible to accepting the planted doubt. The process often begins with seemingly innocuous observations or questions. For instance, instead of directly saying, "You're wrong about that," a manipulator might say, "Are you sure that's how it happened? I seem to remember it differently." Or, regarding a decision, "That's an interesting choice. Are you completely happy with it? Have you considered all the angles?" These questions, while seemingly innocent on the surface, introduce the possibility that the victim's perception or judgment is flawed. The impact can be insidious. Initially, the victim might simply feel a slight unease or a nagging question in the back of their mind. However, as these seeds of doubt accumulate, they can erode the victim's self-assurance. They begin to question their own competence, memory, and judgment, making them more reliant on the manipulator for validation and guidance. This reliance, of course, further strengthens the manipulator's control. Real-world examples are abundant, although often difficult to recognize from the outside. Consider a relationship where one partner consistently undermines the other's career aspirations by subtly questioning their abilities or the viability of their chosen field. "Are you sure you're really cut out for this?" It seems incredibly competitive. Over time, the targeted partner may start to lose confidence and abandon their dreams, effectively giving the other partner more control over their life. In a work setting, a manager might employ this tactic by questioning an employee's decisions, even when they are ultimately successful. "That project worked out, but are you sure that was the best approach? It seemed a bit risky." This constant questioning, even when the outcome is positive, can create a climate of self-doubt and discourage the employee from taking initiative. The seed of doubt can also be applied to manipulate memories, a particularly insidious form of gaslighting. By subtly questioning the accuracy of a past event, the manipulator can create confusion and uncertainty, leading the victim to doubt their own recollections. For example, "Are you positive that's what I said? I don't remember saying that at all." Repeated exposure to these types of statements can warp the victim's memory and create a distorted perception of reality. The effectiveness of this tactic is amplified by the manipulator's ability to maintain a facade of concern or helpfulness. They often frame their questions as being motivated by genuine care or a desire to help the victim avoid mistakes. This makes it harder for the victim to recognize the manipulative intent behind the subtle questioning. Ultimately, the seed of doubt thrives in an environment where the target feels vulnerable, insecure, and dependent. Public shaming, at its core, is the deliberate act of exposing an individual's perceived flaws, wrongdoings, or perceived transgressions to public scrutiny with the intent of inducing shame and, consequently, altering their behavior. It's weaponizing social pressure by leveraging our innate desire for acceptance and fear of ostracism. We are, after all, deeply social creatures. From the earliest tribes to modern society, belonging and social approval have been intrinsically linked to survival and well-being. Public shaming exploits this inherent vulnerability. The mechanism is relatively straightforward. An action is deemed unacceptable by a group. That action is publicized, the individual responsible is identified, and then, through various means, they are subjected to public criticism, ridicule, and condemnation. This can range from online pile-ons and doxing to organized protests and boycotts. The goal isn't necessarily justice or even rehabilitation, though those may be presented as justifications. The primary objective is often to inflict pain and humiliate the target, thereby deterring them, and ideally others, from repeating the offending behavior. Think of the digital era equivalent of the stocks in the town square, except amplified exponentially. A tweet with an insensitive joke, a video showing a moment of poor judgment, a leaked email revealing a controversial opinion. These can all be fuel for the public shaming fire. The online realm offers unprecedented speed and reach, allowing for swift and widespread dissemination of information, regardless of its accuracy or context. This creates a breeding ground for instantaneous judgment and collective outrage. Consider a hypothetical example. A restaurant owner makes a seemingly harmless, but culturally insensitive remark during a local news interview. The clip goes viral. Immediately, social media erupts. Calls for boycotts flood online forums. Review sites are bombarded with negative reviews, regardless of the actual quality of the food or service. The owner receives death threats. Their business suffers. Their reputation is tarnished. They are publicly shamed and, in many cases, financially ruined, all based on a fleeting moment captured on camera. The impact of public shaming can be devastating. Beyond the immediate social and economic consequences, it can lead to severe psychological distress. The constant barrage of negativity can trigger anxiety, depression, and even suicidal ideation. The feeling of being constantly judged and scrutinized can erode self-esteem and create a deep sense of isolation. Victims often experience difficulty trusting others and may withdraw from social interactions altogether. They are essentially trapped in a digital panopticon, forever aware of the watchful eyes of the online mob. Moreover, the effectiveness of public shaming as a behavior modification tool is highly questionable. While it may succeed in silencing dissent or forcing apologies, it rarely leads to genuine remorse or meaningful change. Instead, it often fosters resentment and defensiveness. Individuals who are publicly shamed may double down on their beliefs or actions, viewing themselves as victims of injustice rather than perpetrators of wrongdoing. This can create a cycle of conflict and division, further exacerbating social tensions. The focus shifts from the initial offense to the act of shaming itself, creating a climate of fear and distrust. The underlying issues remain unaddressed, and genuine dialogue becomes impossible. The weaponization of social pressure, in this form, is rarely a solution and often a problem in itself. Isolating the target, cutting off support. It's a chillingly effective tactic in the arsenal of psychological manipulation, and it preys on one of our most fundamental human needs, connection. We are social creatures, wired for belonging. Our relationships provide emotional sustenance, validation, and a crucial reality check. When those lifelines are severed, we become vulnerable, adrift, and far more susceptible to influence. The core concept is brutally simple. Systematically erode the target's connections to family, friends, colleagues, and any other support network. The manipulator aims to create a psychological vacuum, where they become the only source of information, affirmation, and even basic human interaction. This isolation doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual process, often disguised under a veil of concern or even love. One common mechanism is sowing seeds of doubt and distrust. The manipulator might whisper insidious suggestions about the target's friends. "She seems a bit jealous of you, doesn't she?" Or "he never really seemed to understand you." These seemingly innocuous remarks, repeated over time, chip away at the target's confidence in their relationships. The manipulator may manufacture conflicts, deliberately creating situations that drive a wedge between the target and their loved ones. They might spread rumors, misrepresent information, or simply exaggerate perceived slights. Another tactic involves monopolizing the target's time and attention. The manipulator demands increasing amounts of their focus, making it difficult for them to maintain their existing social commitments. They might manufacture crises or create situations that require constant attention, effectively trapping the target in a web of dependency. Over time, the target's social life dwindles, replaced by the manipulator's constant presence. Consider a hypothetical example. Sarah is in a relationship with Mark. Initially, Mark is charming and attentive. However, over time, he becomes increasingly controlling. He starts subtly criticizing Sarah's friends, claiming they are a bad influence or don't truly care about her. He expresses concerns about her spending time with her family, suggesting they're overly critical and don't appreciate her. He constantly texts and calls when she is out with others, making her feel guilty and distracted. He engineers situations where Sarah misses important events with her friends and then comforts her, reinforcing the idea that he is the only one who truly understands her disappointment. Gradually, Sarah finds herself spending less and less time with her support network, relying solely on Mark for companionship and validation. The impact of this isolation can be devastating. Deprived of external perspectives and emotional support, the target's sense of self begins to erode. They may start to question their own judgment, their sanity, and their worth. They become increasingly dependent on the manipulator for guidance and approval, trapped in a cycle of abuse and control. The manipulator's version of reality becomes the only reality, and the target loses the ability to think critically or challenge the manipulator's authority. Furthermore, isolation amplifies feelings of anxiety, depression, and helplessness. The target may experience a profound sense of loneliness and despair, feeling trapped and unable to escape their situation. The absence of external support also makes it far more difficult for the target to recognize the manipulation for what it is and to seek help. They may fear that no one will believe them or that they will be judged for their perceived weakness. In essence, isolating the target is a strategic dismantling of their psychological defenses. It's a calculated effort to create a state of vulnerability and dependence, making them far easier to control and manipulate. It's a dark corner of the psychological landscape, highlighting the profound impact our connections have on our mental well-being and resilience. Boundary violations, in the context of psychological mind games, represent a subtle yet deeply corrosive technique. It's not a single dramatic act, but rather a carefully orchestrated campaign of inching closer and closer to previously established limits, eroding them over time until they effectively disappear. This gradual erosion often leaves the victim disoriented, questioning their own judgment and eventually accepting behaviors they would have initially rejected outright. The core mechanism relies on desensitization and normalization. The perpetrator begins with minor, almost imperceptible transgressions. These might involve probing personal questions under the guise of friendly interest, borrowing small items and delaying their return, or subtly criticizing opinions in a seemingly constructive way. The victim, wanting to be agreeable or avoid conflict, may let these initial violations slide. This is the crucial first step. With each unchallenged transgression, the perpetrator tests the waters, pushing the boundary slightly further. The seemingly innocuous question becomes more intrusive, the borrowed item remains unreturned for longer, and the criticism becomes more pointed, albeit still couched in plausible deniability. The victim, now accustomed to the initial level of discomfort, finds themselves facing a new, slightly elevated threshold. They may feel uneasy, but the change feels incremental, making a strong reaction seem disproportionate. This process continues, like a slow drip of water wearing down a stone. The violations escalate in frequency and intensity, each one building upon the previous ones. Eventually, the perpetrator may engage in behaviors that are overtly disrespectful, manipulative, or even abusive, and the victim, whose boundaries have been systematically dismantled, finds themselves surprisingly compliant. They may rationalize the behavior, blame themselves, or simply feel too exhausted to resist. Consider the example of a workplace. A new employee, eager to impress, might readily agree to stay late occasionally to help a senior colleague. Initially, this is a voluntary act of goodwill. However, the colleague might gradually start expecting these late nights, framing them as essential for team success. The occasional late nights become regular, then mandatory, and eventually, the employee is consistently working significantly longer hours without extra compensation or recognition. Any attempt to object is met with guilt-tripping, suggestions of incompetence, or even veiled threats to their job security. The employee, initially willing to make small sacrifices, has unknowingly had their work-life balance completely eroded. Another common example is in romantic relationships. A partner might start by jokingly teasing their significant other about minor insecurities. Over time, the teasing becomes more frequent, more personal, and more cutting. The victim, initially brushing it off as playful banter, may find their self-esteem slowly diminishing. The perpetrator then introduces controlling behaviors, such as dictating what the victim wears, who they spend time with, or even how they spend their money. Because the boundary violation began with seemingly harmless teasing, the victim may not recognize the severity of the control until they are completely isolated and dependent on the abuser. The impact of boundary violations extends beyond the immediate situation. Victims often experience feelings of confusion, anxiety, and self-doubt. They may struggle to trust their own instincts, leading to further vulnerability in future relationships. The erosion of personal boundaries can also have a profound impact on their sense of self-worth, leaving them feeling powerless and unworthy of respect. Recovery often requires significant self-reflection, therapy, and a conscious effort to re-establish healthy boundaries. The key is awareness and early recognition of the subtle signs of boundary violation, allowing individuals to assert their limits before the erosion becomes irreversible. Exploiting empathy, using compassion against you. It's a chillingly effective manipulation tactic rooted in our inherent desire to alleviate suffering. The core concept revolves around leveraging your compassionate nature, your ability to understand and share the feelings of another, to achieve a desired outcome, often at your expense. It's not simply appealing to your good nature. It's strategically weaponizing your own kindness against you. The mechanism at play involves crafting a narrative designed to evoke a strong emotional response, primarily pity and concern. This narrative can be real, exaggerated, or even entirely fabricated. The key is that it appears credible enough to bypass your critical thinking and trigger your empathetic response. Once your empathy is engaged, the manipulator subtly, or sometimes overtly, positions themselves as needing your help, support, or resources. The requests are often framed in such a way that refusing feels cruel, insensitive, or even morally reprehensible. Consider a hypothetical scenario. A colleague consistently arrives late to work, missing deadlines, and producing substandard work. Initially, you might attribute it to incompetence or lack of motivation. However, this colleague then starts sharing increasingly personal details about their life. A sick relative, financial struggles, a difficult breakup. The details are carefully chosen to tug at your heartstrings, painting a picture of someone overwhelmed and struggling to cope. Your empathy kicks in. You start covering for them, picking up their slack, and offering emotional support. You justify it to yourself by thinking, they're going through a tough time. I need to be there for them. The manipulator, consciously or unconsciously, has successfully exploited your compassion to avoid accountability and shift their responsibilities onto you. The impact of this manipulation can be far-reaching. On a personal level, you might experience increased stress, burnout, and resentment. You may find yourself sacrificing your own needs, time, and resources to support someone who is ultimately taking advantage of your good nature. Over time, this can erode your self-esteem and leave you feeling drained and used. On a broader scale, the exploitation of empathy can have detrimental effects on relationships and even entire organizations. In a romantic relationship, one partner might consistently play the victim, using guilt and emotional blackmail to control the other. In a workplace, a manipulative employee might feign illness or hardship to avoid challenging assignments or gain preferential treatment. This can create a toxic environment where genuine compassion is met with suspicion and distrust. The effectiveness of this tactic hinges on the manipulator's ability to accurately assess your vulnerabilities. They're skilled at identifying your moral compass, your desire to be helpful, and your fear of appearing uncaring. They then tailor their narrative to exploit these weaknesses, making it difficult for you to resist their requests without feeling guilty or selfish. Furthermore, exploiting empathy often involves a blurring of boundaries. The manipulator may share overly personal information too early in the relationship or consistently overshare their problems, creating a sense of intimacy that isn't genuine. This makes it harder to distance yourself or set healthy boundaries, further enabling the manipulative behavior. Recognizing this pattern is a crucial step in preventing this form of manipulation from taking hold. The ability to discern genuine need from manipulative tactics is paramount to protecting your own emotional and mental well-being. Minimization, downplaying the significance at its heart, is a powerful and insidious psychological tactic designed to reduce the perceived importance of an event, behavior, or emotion. It's about diminishing the impact, severity, or consequences of something, thereby lessening the responsibility or guilt associated with it. It's a subtle art, often employed unconsciously, but can be wielded deliberately as a manipulative tool. Think of it as turning down the volume on reality, making a loud, jarring sound seem like a mere background hum. The core mechanism is to present a situation as less significant than it actually is, either to oneself or to others. This can be achieved through various methods, including justification, rationalization, and simply stating that something isn't that bad. The context in which minimization occurs is crucial. It often arises in situations involving wrongdoing, conflict, or painful emotions. For example, an abuser might minimize their violent actions by saying, "It was just a slap," or "I didn't mean to hurt you that badly." This immediately downplays the physical and emotional harm inflicted, shifting the focus away from their responsibility and toward the perceived insignificance of the act itself. Similarly, someone struggling with addiction might minimize their dependence by saying, "I can stop whenever I want. It's just a social thing." The effectiveness of minimization lies in its ability to alter perception. By reducing the perceived significance of an event, the minimizer aims to control the narrative and influence the emotional response of the target. If someone believes an action is not that bad, they're less likely to feel anger, sadness, or a need for retribution. In the case of the abuser, minimizing the violence aims to prevent the victim from recognizing the severity of the abuse and potentially seeking help or leaving the relationship. Consider a hypothetical scenario in the workplace. Imagine an employee, let's call him Mark, consistently takes credit for his colleague Sarah's ideas during meetings. When confronted, Mark might minimize his actions by saying, "I just rephrased what she said. It's not like I stole her idea." He downplays the significance of taking credit, framing it as a simple matter of rephrasing, thus diminishing the ethical implications of his behavior. He shifts the focus from the act of claiming ownership to the seemingly benign act of rewording. The impact of minimization can be devastating. It can lead to a denial of responsibility, enabling harmful behaviors to continue unchecked. Victims of minimization often experience confusion and self-doubt, questioning their own perceptions and emotional reactions. They might begin to believe that their feelings are exaggerated or that they are overreacting, further empowering the minimizer. This gaslighting effect can erode self-esteem and create a cycle of abuse or manipulation. Furthermore, minimization can hinder personal growth and healing. If someone consistently downplays their own mistakes or shortcomings, they're less likely to learn from them and make positive changes. It can create a false sense of security and prevent individuals from confronting uncomfortable truths about themselves. Similarly, minimizing painful emotions can prevent individuals from processing and resolving underlying issues, leading to chronic anxiety, depression, or other mental health problems. Recognizing minimization is the first step in protecting oneself from its harmful effects. Pay attention to language that downplays the severity of events or emotions. Look for phrases like, "It wasn't that bad," "You're overreacting, it's not a big deal," or "I didn't mean anything by it." Question the motives behind these statements and consider whether they're genuinely intended to offer comfort or to manipulate your perception of reality. Ultimately, trusting your own intuition and validating your own experiences is crucial in resisting the insidious power of minimization. Trivialization, making your concerns seem petty. At its core, trivialization is a potent psychological maneuver designed to diminish the importance of another person's thoughts, feelings, or experiences. It's the art of taking something significant to someone and reframing it as insignificant, inconsequential, or simply not worth the energy it's being given. This isn't just a simple disagreement. It's an attempt to invalidate the other person's reality and perspective. The mechanism behind trivialization often involves subtle shifts in language and tone. Phrases like, "Are you still upset about that?" or "Don't you think you're overreacting?" are classic examples. The italicized words carry the weight of the attack, implying that the person's feelings are not only unreasonable, but also prolonged and excessive. It can also manifest in nonverbal cues, like a dismissive wave of the hand or a patronizing smile, reinforcing the message that the concern is unimportant. One common tactic is to compare the concern to something much larger or more significant. For instance, someone complaining about a minor workplace infraction might be met with, "Well, at least you have a job. Think about all the people who are unemployed right now." While acknowledging broader issues isn't inherently wrong, using them to negate the immediate concern effectively shuts down any possibility of addressing the actual problem. The implication is that the person should be grateful and not complain, regardless of the validity of their grievances. Another method is to focus on the supposed irrationality or emotionality of the person expressing the concern. Saying something like, "You're just being emotional," or "You're taking this way too personally," dismisses the concern as stemming from an unstable emotional state rather than a legitimate problem. This tactic is particularly insidious as it attacks the person's character and credibility, making it difficult for them to be taken seriously. It also plays into gendered stereotypes, where women's concerns are often dismissed as purely emotional, while men are expected to be stoic and rational. The impact of trivialization can be profound and damaging. Over time, it erodes self-esteem and self-worth. When someone's feelings are constantly dismissed, they may begin to doubt their own perceptions and question their judgment. This can lead to feelings of anxiety, depression, and isolation. Furthermore, it can create a power imbalance in relationships, where one person consistently invalidates the other's experiences, leading to a sense of helplessness and dependency. Imagine a scenario where a partner repeatedly comes home late without explanation. When confronted, they might respond with, "It's just 15 minutes, what's the big deal?" Or, "You're always making mountains out of molehills." While the lateness itself might seem minor, the lack of communication and consideration for the other person's time and expectations is significant. By trivializing the concern, the partner avoids taking responsibility for their actions and silences any legitimate complaints. Over time, this pattern can create a deep sense of resentment and distrust within the relationship. The effects are not limited to interpersonal relationships. Trivialization can also occur in professional settings, where employees' concerns about workload, harassment, or discrimination are dismissed as being overly sensitive or simply part of the job. This can create a toxic work environment where employees feel undervalued and unheard, leading to decreased productivity and increased burnout. Recognizing trivialization is the first step towards resisting its power. Acknowledging and validating your own feelings, even when others try to dismiss them, is crucial. Furthermore, setting boundaries and refusing to engage in conversations where your concerns are minimized can help protect your emotional well-being. You're just too sensitive. It's a phrase casually tossed around, seemingly innocuous, yet wields a surprising amount of psychological power. It's a prime example of invalidating feelings, a subtle yet corrosive mind game where someone's emotional experience is dismissed, denied, or outright rejected. The core mechanism revolves around undermining an individual's perception of reality, making them question their own sanity and emotional responses. The statement itself implies that the problem lies not with the situation, nor with the speaker's actions, but with the recipient's character. It frames sensitivity as a personal failing, a flaw that needs correcting, rather than acknowledging it as a valid response to a given stimulus. This immediately creates an imbalance of power. The speaker positions themselves as the arbiter of appropriate emotional responses, while the recipient is relegated to a position of inferiority, their feelings deemed excessive and unwarranted. Consider this scenario. Sarah confides in her partner, Mark, about feeling hurt by his consistently late arrivals. She expresses that it makes her feel unimportant and disrespected. Mark, instead of acknowledging her feelings, replies with, "You're just too sensitive. I was only 15 minutes late. You always blow things out of proportion." In this instance, Mark isn't addressing the lateness itself or Sarah's feelings about it. He's directly attacking her emotional validity. He's minimizing her experience by framing it as an overreaction, thus absolving himself of any responsibility for his actions. He effectively shifts the blame onto Sarah, making her feel guilty for even expressing her feelings. The impact of such invalidation can be profound. Repeated exposure to this kind of dismissal erodes self-esteem and fosters self-doubt. The individual begins to internalize the message that their feelings are wrong, inappropriate, or simply too much. They may start to suppress their emotions, fearing judgment or ridicule. This can lead to a cycle of emotional numbness, where they become increasingly disconnected from their own internal experience. Moreover, constant invalidation can damage relationships. Open and honest communication requires a foundation of trust and acceptance. When one partner consistently invalidates the other's feelings, it creates a climate of fear and resentment. The invalidated partner becomes hesitant to express their true emotions, leading to emotional distance and ultimately a breakdown in intimacy. They may even begin to question their perception of reality, wondering if they are indeed crazy or too sensitive, as they've been repeatedly told. This self-doubt can then permeate other areas of their life, impacting their confidence and decision-making abilities. Another insidious aspect of this invalidation is its ambiguity. The phrase "too sensitive" is vague and subjective. It provides no concrete guidance on what constitutes an acceptable emotional response. This lack of clarity leaves the recipient feeling confused and uncertain, constantly second-guessing their own reactions. They are left adrift in a sea of uncertainty, struggling to navigate their emotions without the validating anchor of another's understanding. Over time, this form of psychological manipulation can lead to anxiety, depression, and even post-traumatic stress disorder, particularly if the invalidation is coupled with other forms of abuse. Recognizing this pattern, both in oneself and in others, is the first crucial step towards breaking free from its damaging effects. It requires learning to validate one's own feelings, even when others attempt to dismiss them, and seeking out supportive relationships where emotional expression is encouraged and respected. The ability to identify and resist such invalidation is a cornerstone of psychological well-being and healthy interpersonal relationships. Storytelling and narrative control, shaping the truth. It's the art of constructing a version of events, a story, that serves a particular purpose, often to influence perception, manipulate emotions, or obscure uncomfortable realities. At its core, narrative control is about seizing ownership of the dominant storyline. It's about deciding which details are emphasized, which are omitted, and how the overall narrative is framed. The mechanism behind its effectiveness lies in our innate human predisposition to understand the world through stories. We are wired to seek meaning and coherence, and stories provide that structure. A well-constructed narrative bypasses critical thinking by appealing directly to emotions and existing biases. Once a compelling narrative takes hold, it becomes incredibly difficult to dislodge, even in the face of contradictory evidence. Context is crucial. A narrative operates within a pre-existing framework of beliefs, values, and cultural norms. To be truly effective, a narrative must resonate with this framework, either by reinforcing it or subtly reshaping it. Successful narrative control often involves identifying and exploiting existing anxieties or aspirations within a target audience. Consider, for example, the marketing of luxury goods. The story isn't just about the product itself. It's about the lifestyle, the status, the feeling of belonging that comes with owning it. Advertisements paint a picture of sophistication, success, and happiness, implicitly linking those qualities to the product. This narrative control shifts the focus from the product's utility to its symbolic value, creating desire and driving sales. In a political arena, narrative control is a potent weapon. Politicians and their advisors meticulously craft narratives around their policies, their opponents, and themselves. They might portray themselves as strong leaders, champions of the people, or responsible stewards of the economy. Negative narratives are used to demonize opponents, portraying them as out of touch, corrupt, or dangerous. Think of slogans carefully designed to create a simple, easily digestible story. The impact of narrative control can be profound. At an individual level, it can influence our self-perception, our relationships, and our decision-making. A person who consistently hears a narrative of failure might internalize it, leading to low self-esteem and a self-fulfilling prophecy. Similarly, a manipulative partner might use storytelling to gaslight their victim, distorting their reality and eroding their confidence. On a larger scale, narrative control can shape public opinion, influence elections, and even justify wars. The narratives surrounding historical events are constantly being reevaluated and contested, as different groups seek to assert their version of the truth. Understanding the power of narrative control is essential for critical thinking and media literacy. It allows us to question the stories we are told, to identify the underlying agendas, and to construct our own, more nuanced understandings of the world. We must be wary of accepting narratives at face value, always seeking alternative perspectives and evidence. The ability to deconstruct and analyze narratives is a vital defense against manipulation and a crucial step towards informed decision-making. Information overload, drowning in details. It's a psychological battle fought not with direct confrontation, but with sheer volume. Imagine standing beneath a waterfall, not of water, but of facts, figures, opinions, and demands. That's the essence of information overload. It's a cognitive state where the influx of information exceeds an individual's capacity to process it, leading to impaired decision-making, reduced efficiency, and heightened stress. At its core, information overload isn't just about the amount of information. It's about the relationship between the amount and our processing capacity. A manageable amount of information for one person might be overwhelming for another, depending on their prior knowledge, cognitive skills, and the complexity of the information itself. The mechanism behind this psychological manipulation hinges on a few key principles. Firstly, attention is a limited resource. We can only focus on so many things at once. When bombarded with information, our attention becomes fragmented, jumping from one piece to the next without truly absorbing any of it. This leads to a superficial understanding and a sense of being overwhelmed. Secondly, our working memory, the mental workspace where we hold and manipulate information, has a finite capacity. Trying to cram too much information into it causes a cognitive bottleneck. Older information gets pushed out, making it difficult to synthesize and retain new data. Think of it like trying to pour too much water into a glass. It spills over, wasting the water and making a mess. Thirdly, and perhaps most insidiously, is the inherent human desire to be informed. We fear missing out, leading us to consume more and more information, even when we know it's detrimental. This fear of missing out, or FOMO, is expertly exploited in the digital age, where news feeds and social media platforms are designed to constantly bombard us with updates and notifications, creating a sense of urgency and anxiety. Consider a real-world example, a political campaign. A candidate might intentionally flood the media with a barrage of statistics, accusations, and proposed policies, overwhelming voters with sheer volume. The aim isn't necessarily to persuade with well-reasoned arguments, but rather to create confusion and uncertainty, making it difficult for voters to discern the truth. This can lead to apathy or, worse, a choice based on incomplete or misleading information. Another example exists within corporate negotiations. Imagine a team presenting their proposal. They flood the opposing party with technical specifications, legal jargon, and market analyses, burying the core issues in a mountain of detail. The intention might be to wear down the opposition, make them feel inadequate, and ultimately extract concessions they wouldn't otherwise agree to. The constant filtering and deciphering required to cut through the noise becomes exhausting. The impact of information overload is far-reaching. At an individual level, it can lead to decision fatigue, procrastination, and a feeling of being perpetually behind. It erodes confidence, increases anxiety, and impairs problem-solving abilities. In a professional context, it can lead to decreased productivity, errors, and burnout. In a broader societal context, it can contribute to misinformation, polarization, and a decline in critical thinking. The paradox of choice, amplified by information overload, can leave people paralyzed by options, ultimately leading to dissatisfaction, regardless of the choice made. Drowning in details prevents the emergence of a clear picture, leaving the individual vulnerable and easily manipulated. The very act of attempting to stay informed can, ironically, render them more susceptible to misinformation and manipulation. The human desire to reciprocate is deeply ingrained, almost primal. We feel compelled to return a favor, a gift, or even a perceived kindness. This inherent inclination is the bedrock of the reciprocity trap, a potent psychological mind game that manipulates this very impulse to create a sense of obligation, often disproportionate to the initial gesture. The core mechanism hinges on triggering that automatic tit-for-tat response. Someone performs an act, offering unsolicited assistance, providing a small gift, or even simply sharing personal information, and subtly places you in a psychological debt. This debt, even if you never explicitly agreed to it, generates discomfort. We are social creatures, and owing someone, however minor, disrupts the balance of social interaction. The effectiveness of the reciprocity trap lies in its subtlety. The initial act doesn't necessarily need to be overtly valuable. It's the act of giving, the demonstration of goodwill, that sets the stage. A free sample at a grocery store isn't just about letting you taste the product. It's about initiating a feeling that you should, in turn, purchase something. The small gift subtly nudges you towards feeling obligated to reciprocate by making a purchase. Consider a hypothetical scenario in the workplace. Sarah, a new employee, consistently offers to help her colleagues with minor tasks, even when they haven't explicitly asked. She might offer to fetch coffee, proofread a document, or even just offer encouraging words during a stressful project. While seemingly benevolent, Sarah is subtly building a reservoir of obligation. Later, when she needs a significant favor, perhaps having a colleague cover a crucial presentation on short notice. The accumulated sense of obligation makes it significantly harder for her colleagues to refuse, even if it inconveniences them greatly. They feel pressure to return the favors Sarah has been doling out, despite the imbalance in the scale of the requests. The potency of the reciprocity trap is amplified when the initial gift or favor is perceived as personalized or requiring effort. If someone goes out of their way to do something specifically for you, the feeling of obligation intensifies. This is why personalized gifts, even small ones, are often more impactful than generic ones. The effort invested signals a greater degree of commitment, thus amplifying the psychological pressure to reciprocate in kind. Furthermore, the timing of the initial act is crucial. Offering assistance or a gift when someone is vulnerable or facing a challenge increases the likelihood of the reciprocity trap working. A helping hand during a moment of need is far more memorable and likely to create a lasting feeling of obligation than assistance offered during a moment of ease. The impact of the reciprocity trap can range from harmless, such as buying a product you wouldn't normally consider after receiving a free sample, to significantly detrimental, such as agreeing to a business deal that disadvantages you out of a misplaced sense of loyalty or indebtedness. Recognizing the trap is the first step to neutralizing its effects. Questioning the motivations behind seemingly generous acts and evaluating requests objectively, rather than being swayed by feelings of obligation, are critical defense mechanisms. Learning to politely decline unsolicited favors without feeling guilty can also help prevent falling victim to this powerful psychological manipulation. The illusion of choice, limited options, limited freedom. It's a masterful stroke of psychological manipulation, not because it eliminates choice entirely, but because it curates the options, effectively steering the target towards a predetermined outcome while simultaneously fostering a sense of agency. The core concept hinges on presenting a limited set of options, all of which serve the manipulator's underlying agenda. The target believes they are making a free decision, exercising their autonomy, when in reality, they're simply selecting the lesser of evils or variations on a theme orchestrated by someone else. The mechanism at play is a subtle hijacking of the decision-making process, rather than outright coercion or command, which often triggers resistance and suspicion. The illusion of choice bypasses these defense mechanisms. The individual feels in control, therefore less likely to question the framework within which their choice exists. This is particularly potent when the presented options are framed in a way that makes the desired outcome appear the most logical, appealing, or even the only viable solution. Consider a hypothetical negotiation scenario. A used car salesman, intent on selling a particular vehicle, might present two seemingly distinct financing options: a high interest rate with minimal down payment or a slightly lower interest rate with a substantial down payment. The choice isn't whether or not to buy the car, but rather how to finance it. Both options, however, are designed to maximize the salesman's profit. The customer focuses on comparing the two plans, blinded to the possibility of exploring alternative financing through their own bank, or even walking away from the deal entirely. The illusion of choice has trapped them within a predefined box. The impact of this technique is profound. It can erode a person's sense of autonomy, leaving them feeling subtly manipulated and powerless, even if they can't quite put their finger on why. Over time, repeated exposure to such scenarios can lead to a general distrust of authority figures and a diminished sense of self-efficacy. People may begin to second-guess their decisions, wondering if they were truly acting on their own volition or simply puppets in someone else's game. This isn't limited to high-stakes situations. It permeates everyday life. Think about the menu at a restaurant. While seemingly offering a wide array of dishes, the restaurant has carefully curated the selection to optimize profit margins and inventory management. They might offer 3 different steak options, all prepared using the same cut of meat, but with varying sauces and side dishes, subtly guiding you towards the most profitable choice. You believe you're selecting your preferred dining experience, while the restaurant is subtly influencing your spending. In the political arena, the illusion of choice is a well-honed tactic. Voters might be presented with two candidates, both ostensibly representing different ideologies, but ultimately adhering to the same underlying corporate interests. The choice becomes a matter of selecting the lesser of two evils, reinforcing the status quo and preventing meaningful systemic change. The electorate feels as though they've participated in a democratic process, but their agency has been cleverly constrained. The ethical considerations surrounding the illusion of choice are significant. While it might seem relatively harmless in some contexts, like a restaurant menu, its use in more consequential situations, such as political campaigns or financial negotiations, can have devastating consequences for individuals and society as a whole. Recognizing this technique is crucial for maintaining autonomy and making truly informed decisions. Understanding that the options presented are not necessarily exhaustive, and that genuine freedom lies in exploring alternatives outside the prescribed boundaries, is the key to breaking free from this subtle form of psychological control. Repetition and reinforcement, embedding the message. It's the cornerstone of not only effective advertising and political propaganda, but also a subtle, yet potent, tool in personal psychological manipulation. At its heart, it's a simple principle. The more frequently you hear or experience something, the more likely you are to believe it, internalize it, and ultimately act upon it. This isn't just about mindless parroting. It's about the gradual, often unconscious shaping of thoughts, beliefs, and behaviors. The mechanism is deeply rooted in cognitive psychology. Repetition exploits the brain's natural tendency to prioritize information it encounters frequently. Our brains are wired to conserve energy. If a piece of information keeps recurring, the brain assumes it's important, worth remembering, and likely relevant to our survival or well-being. This leads to a phenomenon known as the illusory truth effect, where repeated statements are judged as more truthful than novel ones, regardless of their actual veracity. The brain essentially equates familiarity with validity. Reinforcement, on the other hand, solidifies the message by associating it with either a positive or negative experience. It's the carrot and stick approach to mental conditioning. Positive reinforcement involves rewarding the acceptance or demonstration of the desired belief or behavior, thereby making it more likely to occur again. This can be as overt as praise and recognition, or as subtle as a shared smile or knowing glance. Negative reinforcement, conversely, involves removing an unpleasant stimulus when the desired behavior is exhibited. This could manifest as the cessation of criticism or the granting of privileges. Consider the advertising world. A catchy jingle, repeated endlessly on television and radio, becomes inextricably linked to a particular product. The jingle itself might be meaningless, but its constant repetition creates a sense of familiarity and positive association. When you're at the store, faced with a choice between several brands, the one with the familiar jingle often feels safer, more trustworthy, even if you consciously know there's no logical reason for it. The message has been embedded through repetition and perhaps even reinforced by the association of the jingle with entertaining commercials. In interpersonal relationships, this technique can be far more insidious. A manipulative partner might repeatedly criticize a person's appearance or abilities, slowly eroding their self-esteem and confidence. The constant negativity, though demonstrably false, becomes internalized over time, leading the victim to believe the criticisms are true. Conversely, a cult leader might shower new recruits with constant praise and affection for expressing agreement with the group's doctrines, reinforcing their adherence and discouraging dissenting opinions. The power of repetition is magnified when it's combined with emotional resonance. A political slogan, repeated endlessly in rallies and online, isn't just a string of words. It's designed to evoke strong emotions: fear, anger, hope, patriotism. The more emotionally charged the message, the more deeply it's etched into the subconscious. This is why propaganda often relies on emotionally manipulative language and imagery. The repetition doesn't just inform. It persuades by bypassing rational thought and appealing directly to the emotions. Ultimately, The key to resisting this form of psychological manipulation lies in awareness. Recognizing the mechanisms of repetition and reinforcement allows you to critically evaluate the messages you're exposed to, question their validity, and avoid being swayed by mere familiarity or emotional manipulation. Consciously seeking out diverse perspectives and actively challenging ingrained beliefs can act as a powerful antidote to the insidious effects of embedded messaging. The appeal to authority, a cornerstone of influence and often manipulation, hinges on our deeply ingrained respect for figures of power, knowledge, or status. It's the psychological shortcut that allows us to bypass critical thinking by deferring to someone perceived as more informed or capable. Blindly following the leader, in this context, becomes not just a matter of obedience, but a suspension of independent judgment. At its core, this phenomenon exploits our inherent social hierarchy and the evolutionary advantage of learning from those who possess expertise or experience. Early humans, for instance, benefited from adhering to the guidance of elders who understood survival techniques. This ingrained predisposition hasn't entirely faded, even as societal structures have evolved. The mechanism is multifaceted. Firstly, perceived authority evokes trust. We tend to believe authoritative figures are knowledgeable and acting in our best interests. This trust, whether earned or manufactured, disarms our skepticism. Secondly, there's the fear of repercussions. Disobeying or questioning an authority figure can carry social, professional, or even legal consequences, creating a strong incentive for compliance. Thirdly, the complexity of modern life often overwhelms us. Faced with intricate information or high-stakes decisions, relying on an expert seems like the most efficient and safest route. The impact is profound. In positive contexts, appealing to authority facilitates efficient decision-making and knowledge transfer. We trust doctors' medical advice, lawyers' legal counsel, and engineers' structural designs because we acknowledge their expertise. However, the potential for abuse is significant. Propaganda frequently leverages this tactic, associating political ideologies with respected figures to garner support. Advertisements often employ celebrity endorsements to sell products, even when the celebrity has no discernible expertise in the product category. The power of a white lab coat in pharmaceutical ads is a classic, if somewhat cliché, example. Real-world examples abound. The Milgram experiment, a chilling demonstration of obedience to authority, revealed how readily individuals would administer seemingly lethal electric shocks to others simply because an authority figure instructed them to do so. This highlights the disturbing potential for authority to override personal ethics and moral judgment. Even seemingly benign scenarios can be problematic. A manager's pronouncements in a workplace, even if lacking factual basis, may be accepted without question simply because of their position, stifling innovation and creating a culture of conformity. Consider a hypothetical scenario. A self-proclaimed guru gains a following by presenting complex scientific concepts in a simplified, albeit inaccurate, manner. They sprinkle their pronouncements with jargon and project an aura of unwavering confidence, convincing followers that they possess superior knowledge. These followers, intimidated by the guru's perceived expertise and lacking the scientific literacy to critically evaluate their claims, blindly accept their teachings, even when those teachings are demonstrably false or harmful. This illustrates how easily people can be swayed by superficial displays of authority and expertise, especially when presented with information that is difficult to independently verify. The critical takeaway is not to dismiss authority entirely, but to approach it with a healthy dose of skepticism. Question assumptions, seek independent verification, and cultivate critical thinking skills. Recognizing our inherent susceptibility to the appeal to authority is the first step in resisting its manipulative potential and ensuring that we are not blindly led down a path of misinformation or unethical conduct. The responsibility for critical evaluation ultimately lies with each individual. regardless of the apparent expertise or authority of the source. The sunk cost fallacy, justifying continued investment. It's a cognitive bias whispering insidious justifications in your ear, urging you to throw good money after bad, pour more time into failing ventures, and cling to relationships long past their expiration date. At its core, it's the tendency to continue investing in something simply because you've already invested so much, even when evidence suggests abandoning it is the most rational course of action. Think of it as a form of mental accounting gone awry. We humans, by nature, are loss-averse. The pain of losing something, be it money, time, or effort, is often perceived as greater than the pleasure of gaining something of equivalent value. The sunk cost fallacy exploits this aversion, amplifying the perceived cost of cutting losses. We reason, subconsciously or consciously, I've already put so much into this. I can't just give up now. That would mean everything I've done so far was for nothing. But here's the catch. Those past investments, those sunk costs, are irretrievable. They are gone. They shouldn't factor into present or future decisions. The only relevant factors are the potential future costs and benefits of continuing versus discontinuing the investment. Yet, the emotional weight of past investments clouds our judgment, obscuring the logical path forward. Imagine you buy a non-refundable ticket to a play for $100. On the day of the play, you feel unwell. Rationally, you should stay home, rest, and recover. However, the sunk cost fallacy kicks in. You think, I spent $100 on this ticket. I can't just waste it. I have to go, even if I feel terrible. The $100 is a sunk cost. Whether you go to the play or not, that money is gone. The only thing that matters now is your well-being. Staying home might be the better decision, even though it means you wasted the ticket money. The mechanism behind this fallacy is multifaceted. Part of it stems from a desire to avoid cognitive dissonance. Admitting that a past investment was a mistake is uncomfortable. It clashes with our self-image as rational decision-makers. Continuing the investment, even if illogical, allows us to maintain the illusion that we knew what we were doing all along. Another factor is the fear of regret. We anticipate the regret we would feel if we abandoned the project and it subsequently succeeded. This fear can be so powerful that it overrides our ability to objectively assess the situation. We become trapped in a cycle of justification, clinging to dwindling hopes and ignoring mounting evidence of failure. This fallacy pervades every aspect of life. In business, it can lead companies to pour millions more into failing projects, refusing to acknowledge that the initial investment was a mistake. In relationships, it can trap individuals in toxic dynamics, clinging to the past and ignoring the present unhappiness. In personal endeavors, it can lead to pursuing degrees or careers that no longer align with our interests or goals, simply because we've already invested so much time and effort. The impact is far-reaching. It leads to wasted resources, prolonged suffering, and missed opportunities. By understanding the mechanics of the sunk cost fallacy, we can begin to recognize its influence on our decisions and break free from its grip. The key is to consciously detach ourselves from past investments, focus on present realities, and evaluate future options with a clear and unbiased perspective. Acknowledging a past mistake, however painful, is often the first step toward making a more rational and ultimately more rewarding decision. Humor, often perceived as a lighthearted social lubricant, can be a surprisingly potent tool in the arsenal of psychological mind games. Its effectiveness in disarming, specifically in joking away concerns, lies in its ability to circumvent logical defenses and directly influence emotional states. At its core, this technique operates by subtly shifting the perceived threat level of a situation or concern, making it seem less significant and therefore less worthy of serious consideration. The mechanism hinges on the release of endorphins and the activation of the brain's reward system triggered by laughter and amusement. This positive emotional response is fundamentally incompatible with anxiety and fear, creating a momentary emotional dissonance. In that window of reduced tension, the concern, even if legitimate, loses some of its perceived urgency and importance. The power of humor stems from its subjective nature. What one person finds funny, another might find offensive or irrelevant. This ambiguity is precisely what allows it to bypass conscious scrutiny. When confronted with a direct challenge or serious question, individuals tend to engage in critical thinking, weighing evidence and considering potential consequences. However, humor, delivered skillfully, sidesteps this process. The immediate goal becomes understanding and appreciating the joke, rather than analyzing the underlying issue. Consider a hypothetical scenario. A manager confronts an employee about consistently missing deadlines. A direct accusation might trigger defensiveness, leading to excuses, justifications, or even outright denial. However, if the manager begins by saying, "I'm starting to think you have a time-bending machine hidden in your cubicle because deadlines seem to exist in a different dimension for you," the employee is momentarily disarmed. The absurdity of the statement, if delivered with genuine humor, creates a brief emotional shift. The employee is more likely to respond with a laugh or a self-deprecating comment, opening a pathway for a less confrontational, more productive conversation about the actual problem. The impact of this technique is multifaceted. Firstly, it fosters rapport. Sharing a laugh creates a sense of connection and common ground, making the target more receptive to influence. Secondly, it deflects attention. The focus shifts from the potentially uncomfortable or threatening subject matter to the humor itself, diverting the individual's mental energy away from critical analysis. Thirdly, it normalizes the situation. By presenting the concern in a humorous light, it implies that the problem is not as serious as it might seem, reducing the emotional intensity surrounding it. However, the ethical implications of this technique cannot be ignored. While humor can be used to diffuse tense situations and facilitate communication, it can also be employed manipulatively to trivialize legitimate concerns, avoid accountability, or silence dissenting voices. When humor is used to dismiss someone's feelings or belittle their experiences, it becomes a form of emotional invalidation, potentially causing significant harm. For example, joking about a colleague's anxiety or downplaying their professional contributions can undermine their confidence and create a hostile work environment. The line between playful banter and harmful manipulation is often blurred, requiring careful consideration of intent, context, and the potential impact on the individual. A crucial factor is the power dynamic. Humor from someone in a position of authority carries significantly more weight and potential for abuse than humor exchanged between peers. Therefore, responsible and ethical use of humor demands self-awareness, empathy, and a genuine desire to build positive relationships rather than exploit vulnerabilities. Feigned vulnerability is a potent and insidious mind game that preys on our inherent human capacity for empathy and compassion. It's a calculated manipulation where someone pretends to be emotionally or physically weak, helpless, or deeply wounded, not for genuine connection or support, but to gain an unfair advantage, control, or access to resources they wouldn't otherwise possess. At its core, feigned vulnerability exploits the automatic response most people have to someone presenting as distressed. We are, by nature, wired to help those who appear to be suffering. This instinctive altruism becomes the weapon in the manipulator's arsenal. They present themselves as fragile, overwhelmed, or wronged, consciously crafting a narrative designed to elicit sympathy and trust. The mechanism works like this. The manipulator presents a scenario, real or fabricated, that casts them as a victim. This could involve sharing a supposedly traumatic past experience, exaggerating a current hardship, or even fabricating an illness. The key is the performance, the carefully calibrated display of emotion, designed to bypass rational scrutiny and tap directly into the listener's empathy. Once empathy is activated, the target's critical thinking skills often diminish. They become more willing to believe the manipulator's claims, offer assistance without questioning motives, and even overlook red flags that would otherwise be apparent. Consider the classic scenario of the con artist. They might approach someone claiming to have lost their wallet and needing money for a bus ticket to get home to their sick mother. The story is designed to evoke pity and a desire to help. The target, caught up in the seemingly desperate situation, might readily offer assistance without verifying the story or considering the possibility of deception. The manipulator benefits from the target's generosity, disappearing with the money, leaving the target feeling foolish and exploited. The impact of feigned vulnerability can be devastating. Beyond the immediate practical consequences, like financial loss, the betrayal of trust can leave deep emotional scars. The target may feel foolish, gullible, and question their own judgment. It can erode their faith in humanity and make them hesitant to offer help in the future, even to those genuinely in need. In more complex relationships, feigned vulnerability can be a tool for control. A manipulative partner might consistently portray themselves as emotionally fragile or dependent, using guilt and emotional blackmail to control their partner's actions. For instance, they might threaten to relapse into an addiction or express suicidal ideation if their partner attempts to leave the relationship. This creates a power dynamic where the target feels responsible for the manipulator's well-being, effectively trapping them in the relationship. The workplace is another fertile ground for this manipulation. An employee might constantly complain about their workload, exaggerate their stress levels, or even feign illness to avoid responsibilities or gain preferential treatment. This can create resentment among colleagues who have to pick up the slack and damage the overall team dynamic. Recognizing feigned vulnerability requires careful observation and a healthy dose of skepticism. Look for inconsistencies in the manipulator's story, discrepancies between their words and actions, and a pattern of exploiting others' sympathy. Trust your gut instinct. If something feels off, it probably is. While compassion is a valuable virtue, it's crucial to temper it with discernment and a willingness to question motives. Learning to identify and resist this manipulative tactic is essential for protecting yourself from emotional and practical harm. Mirroring. It's a subtle, often unconscious act. We do it naturally, mimicking the posture, gestures, speech patterns, and even emotions of those around us. It's a fundamental component of social interaction, a silent signal that says, "I understand you," fostering connection and building trust. But, like many innate behaviors, mirroring can be weaponized, transformed from a genuine expression of empathy into a calculated manipulation to create a false sense of rapport. At its core, mirroring exploits our inherent bias towards those who resemble us. We subconsciously associate similarity with safety, trustworthiness, and belonging. When someone subtly mirrors our actions, our brain interprets this as a sign of alignment, triggering the release of oxytocin, often dubbed the love hormone, which further strengthens feelings of connection and trust. This positive association bypasses our critical thinking, making us more susceptible to influence. The technique manifests in myriad ways. A salesperson might subtly adopt your posture as you browse, leaning forward when you do, tilting their head at the same angle. They might echo your word choices, using the same jargon or colloquialisms you employ, creating a sense that they speak your language. A negotiator might match your emotional tone, reflecting your calm demeanor or mirroring your frustration, thereby appearing understanding and empathetic, even if their underlying motives are far from altruistic. Consider this hypothetical scenario. You're meeting with a financial advisor. You express concern about market volatility and the need for a safe investment strategy. The advisor, instead of immediately launching into a sales pitch, subtly mirrors your anxiety. They furrow their brow slightly, adopt a concerned tone of voice, and say, "I understand your apprehension. It's perfectly reasonable to feel uneasy given the current climate. My priority is to ensure your peace of mind." By mirroring your emotions, they validate your concerns and position themselves as an ally, someone who understands your needs and has your best interests at heart. This perceived empathy lowers your defenses, making you more receptive to their subsequent recommendations, even if those recommendations ultimately benefit them more than you. Beyond physical gestures and verbal cues, mirroring extends to more subtle aspects of personality and values. A con artist might research your background, identifying your hobbies, political affiliations, or even favorite sports teams, then subtly incorporate these elements into their interactions with you. They might casually mention a shared interest in a particular author, subtly express support for the same political cause, or feign excitement about the same sports team. These calculated displays of similarity create a powerful illusion of kinship, making you more likely to trust them and overlook potential red flags. The effectiveness of mirroring lies in its subconscious nature. We rarely consciously register the act of being mirrored. Instead, we experience a vague sense of comfort, familiarity, and connection, leading us to feel more favorably towards the individual employing the technique. This makes it particularly insidious, as we're often unaware of the manipulation taking place. Recognizing that mirroring, while a natural and often positive social behavior, can be strategically employed to manufacture rapport and manipulate trust, is the first step in protecting oneself from its potentially harmful effects. The key is to observe behavior critically and assess motivations independently of the feeling of connection. Playing hot and cold, or the push-pull dynamic, is a manipulation tactic rooted in alternating between affection and rejection to create confusion and dependence in another person. It's a calculated strategy that exploits our innate desire for connection and validation, turning it into a source of anxiety and insecurity. At its core, this dynamic is about establishing and maintaining power within a relationship, be it romantic, platonic, or even familial. The hot phase involves showering the target with attention, praise, and affection. This could manifest as constant communication, thoughtful gestures, declarations of admiration, or simply being incredibly present and engaged. The purpose here is to create a strong sense of connection and positive reinforcement, essentially establishing a baseline of expectation. The target begins to associate the manipulator with feelings of happiness, security, and validation. However, this period of warmth is inevitably followed by the cold phase. Suddenly, the attention wanes, the communication diminishes, and the affectionate gestures disappear. The manipulator becomes distant, unresponsive, or even critical. They might offer vague excuses for their behavior, or worse, offer no explanation at all, leaving the target to grapple with uncertainty and self-doubt. This abrupt shift in behavior is the crucial element. It's designed to trigger a sense of unease and anxiety in the target. They begin to question what they did wrong, why the affection has been withdrawn, and what they can do to regain the manipulator's favor. This questioning leads to an obsessive focus on the manipulator and their unpredictable behavior. The target essentially becomes addicted to the hot phases, desperately seeking to recapture the initial feelings of validation and connection. The mechanism behind this tactic lies in the principles of intermittent reinforcement. This psychological concept dictates that behaviors are more strongly reinforced when rewards are delivered inconsistently, rather than predictably. Think of a gambling addict. The occasional win, even amidst a string of losses, is enough to keep them hooked. Similarly, the hot phases and the push-pull dynamic act as intermittent rewards, fueling the target's desire and perpetuating the cycle. Imagine a scenario. A charismatic individual initially lavishes attention on a new acquaintance, showering them with compliments and readily available support. This creates a powerful bond, making the acquaintance feel valued and understood. Then, without warning, the charismatic individual becomes aloof and dismissive, offering curt responses or ignoring messages altogether. The bewildered acquaintance, now craving the initial attention, might attempt to appease the individual, altering their own behavior in an effort to regain their approval. This could involve agreeing with opinions they don't necessarily hold, sacrificing their own needs, or constantly seeking validation. The impact of the push-pull dynamic can be devastating. It erodes self-esteem, breeds anxiety, and creates a deep sense of dependence on the manipulator. The target may become isolated from their own support network as they prioritize the manipulator's needs and approval above their own. Over time, this manipulation can lead to emotional exhaustion, depression, and even post-traumatic stress. The target's sense of self is gradually eroded, replaced by a constant need for external validation from the manipulator. The power imbalance becomes increasingly pronounced, leaving the target feeling trapped and helpless. Recognizing this pattern is the first step towards breaking free from its harmful effects. Cognitive dissonance, the unsettling feeling we experience when holding conflicting beliefs, ideas, or values. It's the mental equivalent of nails on a chalkboard, and our minds are remarkably adept at silencing that screech. But how and why? Because dissonance isn't just uncomfortable, it's a threat. It suggests we're irrational, inconsistent, perhaps even wrong. And no one enjoys admitting they're wrong, especially to themselves. At its core, cognitive dissonance theory proposes that we are driven to maintain consistency in our thoughts and behaviors. When inconsistency arises, we experience psychological stress, the dissonance. This stress motivates us to reduce the conflict, and we do so through a variety of mental gymnastics. The most common strategies involve changing one or more of the conflicting cognitions, adding new cognitions to justify the inconsistency, or reducing the importance of the conflicting cognitions. Imagine a smoker, fully aware of the deadly consequences of their habit. They believe smoking is harmful, yet they continue to smoke. This is a prime example of cognitive dissonance in action. The conflict between the belief, smoking kills, and the behavior, I smoke, creates a state of mental unease. To resolve this, the smoker might employ several tactics. They might try to quit, changing the behavior. They might downplay the risks, telling themselves, it's only a few cigarettes a day, or my grandfather smoked until he was 90, reducing the importance of the conflicting cognition. They might add new cognitions, rationalizing their behavior by saying, smoking helps me relax, or life is short anyway, adding justifying cognitions. Or they might even start believing studies linking smoking to cancer are flawed or exaggerated, changing the belief. The power of cognitive dissonance extends far beyond personal habits. It influences our decision-making in all aspects of life. Consider a consumer who buys a new car, only to later discover negative reviews. The dissonance between their decision, I bought this car, and the new information, this car has problems, can lead them to actively seek out positive reviews to reinforce their initial choice. They might even start dismissing the negative reviews as biased or unreliable. This highlights how dissonance reduction can bias our perception of information, leading us to selectively attend to evidence that confirms our existing beliefs and ignore evidence that contradicts them. Political affiliations are another fertile ground for cognitive dissonance. When a politician we support takes a questionable action, we often experience discomfort. To alleviate this dissonance, we might rationalize the action, downplay its significance, or even shift our perception of the action itself. We might tell ourselves that the politician had good intentions, that the action was necessary under the circumstances, or that the media is unfairly exaggerating the situation. This demonstrates how cognitive dissonance can contribute to political polarization, making it difficult for people to engage in constructive dialogue and compromise. Furthermore, cognitive dissonance plays a significant role in justifying effort. The effort justification effect suggests that we tend to value outcomes more highly if we've invested significant effort to achieve them. Imagine undergoing a grueling initiation process to join a club. The dissonance between the unpleasant experience and the desire to believe that the club is worthwhile motivates us to rate the club more positively than we otherwise would. This explains why we often stick with projects or relationships, even when they're no longer fulfilling, simply because we've invested so much time and energy into them. We bend our beliefs to align with our past actions, even when those actions were ultimately unwise. The implications of cognitive dissonance are profound. It reveals the extent to which our beliefs, are malleable and susceptible to manipulation. By understanding the mechanisms of dissonance reduction, we can become more aware of our own biases and vulnerabilities and make more rational and informed decisions. Framing effects. It's the art of painting perception, sculpting reality with the subtle brushstrokes of language and context. At its heart, the framing effect demonstrates that how information is presented, the frame around it, significantly influences our decisions, even when the underlying facts remain objectively the same. We believe we are rational actors, meticulously weighing pros and cons, but the framing effect exposes our vulnerability to carefully crafted narratives. The core mechanism hinges on cognitive biases, particularly loss aversion and the anchoring bias. Loss aversion, a deeply ingrained human tendency, dictates that we feel the pain of a loss more acutely than the pleasure of an equivalent gain. Consequently, we are more likely to avoid risks framed as potential losses, even if the potential gains are identical. Consider this classic example. You're presented with two options for treating a disease affecting 600 people. Option A guarantees saving 200 lives. Option B offers a 33% chance of saving all 600 people and a 66% chance of saving no one. Most people, when presented with this frame, choose option A, the guaranteed save. We are risk-averse when considering gains. Now consider the same scenario, but framed differently. Option A guarantees that 400 people will die. Option B offers a 33% chance that no one will die and a 66% chance that all 600 people will die. Suddenly, the majority shifts towards option B. The numbers are identical to the first scenario. Saving 200 is the same as 400 dying, but the framing, focusing on death rather than saving, activates our loss aversion. The potential for no deaths becomes a more appealing prospect than the certainty of 400 deaths, even if the objective outcome remains statistically equivalent. The anchoring bias further reinforces the framing effect. The initial information presented, the anchor, unconsciously influences subsequent judgments. If a product is initially priced at $500 and then discounted to $400, the perceived value is higher than if it had been priced at $400 from the start. The $500 acts as the anchor, making the discounted price seem like a significant bargain, regardless of its intrinsic worth. The implications of framing effects are pervasive. In marketing, it's used to highlight the benefits of a product while downplaying potential drawbacks. A food product might be advertised as 95% fat-free rather than 5% fat, even though they convey the same information. The positive framing of fat-free is far more appealing. In politics, framing shapes public opinion on complex issues. A proposed tax cut might be framed as putting money back in the pockets of hard-working families to garner support, or as a tax break for the wealthy to generate opposition. The carefully chosen language directs the narrative, influencing voters' perceptions and ultimately their decisions. Even in medical settings, framing plays a crucial role. A doctor might present surgery as having a 90% survival rate instead of a 10% mortality rate, even though they are mathematically equivalent. The positive framing can alleviate patient anxiety and encourage them to proceed with treatment. The power of framing lies in its ability to subtly manipulate our perception, bypassing our conscious critical thinking. It exploits our inherent biases, guiding us towards choices that may not be objectively the best, but rather the most appealingly presented. Understanding framing effects is crucial for navigating the complexities of the world, allowing us to critically evaluate information and make more informed decisions, resisting the persuasive power of carefully painted perceptions. The foot in the door technique, a subtle yet potent weapon in the arsenal of psychological manipulation. At its heart lies the principle of gradual compliance. It suggests that if you can persuade someone to agree to a small, relatively innocuous request, they are significantly more likely to agree to a larger, related request later on. It's about building momentum, setting a precedent of agreement that makes subsequent compliance feel almost natural. The technique thrives on the human desire for consistency. Once someone has publicly committed to a small action, altering their behavior to reject a larger, related request would create cognitive dissonance, the uncomfortable feeling of holding contradictory beliefs or actions. To alleviate this discomfort, individuals often rationalize their initial agreement and convince themselves they are the kind of person who would comply with the larger request as well. They've already defined themselves, even subtly, as helpful, supportive, or agreeable in that context. To backtrack would be to contradict that self-perception. Think of it like this. A neighbor asks you to sign a petition supporting a local park cleanup. It's a low-stakes request, easily granted. You sign. Now, a week later, the same neighbor returns, asking if you'd be willing to volunteer for an hour at the park cleanup itself. Because you've already signaled your support by signing the petition, the likelihood of you agreeing to volunteer has dramatically increased. You've established a baseline of agreement, a small foothold that paves the way for greater commitment. The effectiveness of the foot-in-the-door technique also hinges on the perceived relationship between the initial and subsequent requests. They must be perceived as related, belonging to the same general cause or sphere of influence. Asking someone to sign a petition about park cleanup and then later requesting a donation to a political campaign would likely be less effective than asking them to volunteer their time for the cleanup itself. The connection needs to be logical and apparent for the principle of consistency to truly kick in. Consider another scenario. A salesperson calls and asks if you'd be willing to answer a few short questions about your laundry habits. It seems harmless, a minimal commitment. You agree. A week later, the same salesperson calls back, now pitching their new, revolutionary laundry detergent. Because you've already engaged with them and answered their initial questions, you're more inclined to listen to their pitch, even consider purchasing the product. The initial survey acted as the foot in the door, making you more receptive to the subsequent sales pitch. The power of the foot in the door technique lies in its subtle manipulation of human psychology. It doesn't rely on coercion or direct pressure, but rather on the inherent drive for consistency and the desire to maintain a positive self-image. It's a slow burn, a calculated strategy that gradually builds commitment and increases the likelihood of compliance. Understanding this technique is crucial, not just to recognize when it's being used against you, but also to appreciate the subtle ways in which our own need for consistency can influence our decisions and actions. It underscores the importance of critically evaluating even seemingly minor requests, as they may be the first step down a path of escalating commitments. The door-in-the-face technique, a masterclass in persuasive maneuvering, hinges on the simple, yet surprisingly effective, principle of reciprocity. It's the art of strategically engineering rejection to pave the way for eventual acceptance. The core idea is to first present an individual with a request so large, so demanding, that's almost guaranteed to be refused. Then, and this is the crucial part, you follow up with a smaller, more reasonable request, the one you actually wanted all along. Why does it work? The answer lies within the human psyche's inherent need for balance and fairness. When we refuse a request, particularly a substantial one, we often experience a twinge of guilt, a feeling of having denied someone something they wanted. This feeling, however subtle, creates a psychological discomfort that we instinctively try to alleviate. The presentation of a smaller, seemingly more manageable request offers us a way to do just that. We perceive it as a concession on the part of the requester, and we feel obligated to reciprocate, to meet them halfway. This feeling of reciprocal obligation dramatically increases the likelihood that we'll agree to the second, smaller request. Think of it this way. You're a student approaching your professor. You begin by asking for an extension on a major assignment, say a full 2 weeks. Knowing the professor's strict adherence to deadlines, you anticipate a no, and you get it. But now, you follow up with a slightly sheepish, "Okay, I understand. Would it be possible, perhaps, to just have a 3-day extension?" Suddenly, that 3-day extension, which might have seemed unthinkable if presented initially, seems far more palatable, both to you and, crucially, to the professor. They've already refused your initial, exorbitant request, and now, in an attempt to be fair and understanding, they are more likely to grant you the smaller extension. The effectiveness of the door-in-the-face technique relies on several key factors. First, the initial request must be genuinely large and likely to be rejected, but not so outrageous that it's perceived as insincere or manipulative. If the initial request is seen as a joke or an insult, the technique will backfire, generating resentment rather than compliance. Second, the two requests must be related in some way. Jumping from asking someone to donate $1,000 to a charity to asking them to watch your cat while you're on vacation probably won't work because the requests are unrelated. They both need to exist within a similar sphere of influence or need. Finally, the second request must be presented relatively soon after the first. A delay diminishes the feeling of reciprocal obligation, eroding the technique's persuasive power. In a real-world sales context, a car salesperson might initially try to upsell you on a model with all the bells and whistles, knowing full well it's beyond your budget. After you decline, they might then suggest a slightly less expensive model with fewer features, the one they were actually aiming to sell you all along. Because you rejected the first, more extravagant offer, the second, more reasonable one seems far more appealing, increasing the chances of a sale. The power of this technique lies in its subtle manipulation of our inherent social norms. It preys on our desire to be seen as fair, reasonable, and accommodating. Understanding its mechanics allows us not only to wield it effectively, but also to recognize when we're being subjected to it, enabling us to make more informed and autonomous decisions. It's a constant reminder that persuasion is often less about the specific words we use and more about the psychological context in which those words are received. Love bombing, the illusion of instant intimacy. It's a manipulative tactic, a psychological blitzkrieg disguised as affection. Imagine being showered with overwhelming attention, lavish gifts, constant praise, and declarations of profound love within a time frame that feels unnatural. That's the essence of love bombing. It's not genuine romance blossoming. It's a carefully orchestrated strategy to rapidly gain control and dependence over another person. The core mechanism hinges on exploiting fundamental human needs, the desire for connection, validation, and feeling cherished. We all crave to be understood and appreciated. Love bombing hyper-targets these desires, flooding the victim with seemingly unconditional love and acceptance. The manipulator meticulously crafts an image of the perfect partner, mirroring the victim's values, interests, and even insecurities. This creates an intoxicating sense of being seen, heard, and finally, completely understood. Think of it as a meticulously constructed house of cards. Each card represents an act of affection, a thoughtful text message, a surprise gift, a romantic weekend getaway, constant compliments. Individually, these acts might seem innocuous, even delightful. But when stacked together at an accelerated pace, they create a towering structure of perceived intimacy that is inherently unstable. The sheer intensity and speed of the affection overwhelms the victim's natural defenses, bypassing their critical thinking and clouding their judgment. Consider a hypothetical scenario. Sarah, a young artist struggling with self-doubt, meets Mark. Mark immediately becomes her biggest fan. He attends every art show, praises her work excessively, buys her expensive art supplies, and declares her a genius. He spends every waking moment with her, showering her with attention and proclaiming that he's never felt such a strong connection with anyone before. He anticipates her needs, finishes her sentences, and seems to understand her on a level no one ever has. Sarah, initially hesitant, finds herself swept away by the whirlwind romance. She starts relying on Mark's constant validation, her self-worth becoming inextricably linked to his approval. The impact of love bombing is profound and often devastating. The initial high of intense affection is followed by a gradual, almost imperceptible shift. The love bomber, having secured their position of influence, begins to withdraw affection, introduce subtle criticisms, and isolate the victim from their support network. The initial perfect image slowly crumbles, revealing a controlling and manipulative individual beneath. The victim, now emotionally dependent, becomes desperate to recapture the initial euphoria. They may rationalize the manipulator's behavior, blaming themselves for the change. This desperation further strengthens the manipulator's control, leading to a cycle of intermittent reinforcement, brief periods of affection interspersed with criticism and control. This leaves the victim constantly seeking validation, walking on eggshells to avoid triggering the manipulator's displeasure. Ultimately, love bombing creates a distorted reality where the victim's self-worth is entirely dependent on the manipulator's approval. The rapid escalation of intimacy fosters a false sense of security, making it incredibly difficult to recognize the manipulative tactics at play until significant damage has been done. The illusion of instant intimacy shatters, leaving behind a landscape of emotional wreckage, shattered self-esteem, and a profound sense of betrayal. The victim is left to rebuild their life, often struggling with trust issues and emotional scars that could take years to heal. Recognizing this pattern is the first step towards protecting oneself from this insidious form of psychological manipulation. Triangulation, a classic divide-and-conquer strategy in the realm of psychological manipulation, is a maneuver where one person strategically involves a third party to manipulate a relationship or situation. It's rarely about genuine conflict resolution. Instead, it's a calculated move to gain power, control, or validation. The core mechanism hinges on creating a dynamic where two individuals are pitted against each other, with the manipulator orchestrating events from the sidelines, often appearing blameless or even as a helpful mediator. The process typically begins with the manipulator identifying vulnerabilities or pre-existing tensions between two individuals. They then subtly introduce the third party, often a friend, family member, colleague, or even an authority figure, into the equation. This introduction isn't accidental. It's a deliberate attempt to shift the balance of power. The manipulator will feed information, often distorted or incomplete, to the third party, painting one of the original individuals in a negative light. This can involve subtle criticisms, spreading rumors, or exaggerating flaws. For example, imagine a workplace scenario. Sarah and David are colleagues with differing opinions on a project. Their manager, Mark, senses this tension. Instead of directly addressing the issue, Mark confides in Lisa, another colleague, about his concerns regarding David's commitment to the project, subtly implying he's unreliable. Mark might say things like, "I'm just a little worried about David. He seems distracted lately," or, "I appreciate your dedication, Lisa. David doesn't seem as invested." Lisa, now privy to Mark's supposedly confidential concerns, might subtly treat David differently, creating further friction between Sarah and David and solidifying Mark's position of influence. He hasn't explicitly told Sarah anything negative about David, and to David, Mark appears supportive, thus maintaining plausible deniability. The beauty, or rather, the ugliness, of triangulation lies in its indirectness. The manipulator avoids direct confrontation, preferring to operate through intermediaries. This allows them to evade accountability if their actions are questioned. If Sarah confronts Mark, he can feign innocence, claiming he was merely sharing his concerns with a trusted colleague. He can even use Lisa as a shield, saying, "Lisa also noticed David seemed less engaged." The third party, often unwittingly, becomes an accomplice in the manipulation. The impact of triangulation can be devastating. It erodes trust, fosters resentment, and creates a climate of anxiety and suspicion. The targeted individual often feels isolated and confused, unsure of where the animosity is stemming from. They may become defensive, trying to prove their worth or defend themselves against unseen accusations. The relationship between the original two parties becomes poisoned, often beyond repair. Furthermore, triangulation can perpetuate cycles of abuse. If the manipulator successfully uses this technique, they are likely to repeat it in other relationships, solidifying their position of power. The victims, in turn, may internalize feelings of inadequacy or mistrust, impacting their future relationships. In families, triangulation can create deep-seated rifts between siblings or between parents and children, leaving lasting emotional scars. Recognizing triangulation is crucial for self-preservation. Look for patterns of indirect communication, third-party involvement in conflicts, and disproportionate negative attention directed towards one individual. If you find yourself consistently caught in the middle of disputes or hearing negative information about someone from a third party, it's a red flag. Addressing the situation directly, setting boundaries, and refusing to participate in gossip are essential steps in dismantling this manipulative tactic. Breaking the cycle often requires confronting the manipulator's behavior directly, though this can be risky, or, in severe cases, removing oneself from the toxic environment entirely. Emotional blackmail. It sounds dramatic, theatrical even, but its power lies in its insidious subtlety. It's the art of manipulation disguised as concern, control cloaked in affection, and threats delivered not with raised voices, but with wounded sighs and loaded implications. At its core, emotional blackmail is about creating a power imbalance in a relationship, leveraging a victim's fears and emotional vulnerabilities to control their behavior. It's a relationship held hostage by feelings. The mechanism is relatively straightforward. The blackmailer identifies what their victim values most: approval, security, the relationship itself, or even their own self-image as a good person. They then use these values as leverage, threatening to withhold love, affection, or support if the victim doesn't comply with their demands. The threat isn't always explicit. Often, it's communicated through hints, guilt trips, and passive-aggressive behavior. Consider this hypothetical. Sarah wants to spend the weekend with her friends, something she rarely does. Her partner, Mark, sighs deeply and says, "Oh, that's fine. I guess I'll just stay here alone. It's not like I ever get to see you anyway. I thought we were supposed to be a team. I'll probably just order takeout and watch TV by myself. It's not like I have anyone else." Notice the absence of a direct command. Yet, the message is clear. If Sarah leaves, Mark will be lonely and resentful, implying she is selfish and not prioritizing their relationship. This is emotional blackmail in action. He's playing on her guilt and fear of disappointing him to manipulate her decision. There are common tactics used by emotional blackmailers. Withholding affection is a classic. Silence, coldness, or outright ignoring the victim are used to create a sense of unease and pressure. Another tactic is guilt tripping, reminding the victim of past sacrifices or perceived shortcomings to make them feel obligated to comply. "After everything I've done for you," is a common phrase. Then there's self-pity, exaggerating one's own suffering or helplessness to elicit sympathy and manipulate the victim's actions. Finally, threats, even veiled ones, are a staple. These can range from direct threats to end a relationship to more subtle hints of self-harm or despair if the victim doesn't comply. The impact of emotional blackmail can be devastating. Victims often experience chronic anxiety, feelings of worthlessness, and a deep sense of guilt, even when they haven't done anything wrong. They may constantly second-guess their decisions, fearing the consequences of displeasing the blackmailer. Over time, this can erode their self-esteem, making them increasingly dependent on the blackmailer's approval. The victim may also isolate themselves from friends and family, fearing that others will see through the manipulation and judge them for staying in the relationship. This isolation further strengthens the blackmailer's control. Distinguishing between genuine emotional expression and emotional blackmail is crucial. A healthy relationship involves expressing needs and feelings openly and honestly. The key difference lies in the intent and the consequences. In a healthy exchange, both partners are willing to compromise and respect each other's boundaries. In emotional blackmail, the blackmailer's primary goal is control, and they are unwilling to respect the victim's autonomy. The consequence is not mutual understanding, but the victim's compliance gained through fear and guilt. Emotional blackmail creates a toxic dynamic, turning affection into a weapon and leaving deep emotional scars on its victims. The silent treatment. Weaponizing the void. It's a chillingly simple, yet devastatingly effective, form of psychological manipulation. At its core, it involves the deliberate and systematic withdrawal of communication, a strategic act of ignoring someone to inflict emotional pain and exert control. Think of it as emotional starvation, depriving the target of the very sustenance of human connection, acknowledgement, validation, and interaction. Unlike a brief cooling-off period after an argument, where both parties mutually agree to take space, the silent treatment is unilateral and often punitive. It's deployed as a punishment, a method of forcing compliance, or a way to avoid addressing uncomfortable issues. The silent treatment isn't about self-regulation. It's about other regulation, controlling the other person's behavior through emotional duress. The mechanism behind its effectiveness lies in our innate need for social connection and belonging. Humans are social creatures. Our brains are wired to respond to social interaction, and its absence triggers profound discomfort. When someone consistently ignores us, it activates the same neural pathways associated with physical pain. This sense of rejection and isolation leads to feelings of anxiety, confusion, worthlessness, and even despair. The target is left grappling with a confusing mix of emotions, desperately trying to understand what they did wrong and how to rectify the situation. Consider a scenario. A husband forgets his wife's birthday. Instead of confronting him directly, she withdraws. She stops speaking to him, avoids eye contact, and offers curt, monosyllabic responses when absolutely necessary. He's left to flounder, unsure of the specific transgression and desperate to restore the connection. He might try apologizing profusely, buying lavish gifts, or bending over backwards to fulfill her unspoken needs, all in an attempt to break through the wall of silence. In this instance, the silent treatment serves as both punishment for the perceived slight and a tool to manipulate him into demonstrating his remorse and commitment. Or imagine a workplace dynamic. A manager is displeased with an employee's performance, but instead of providing constructive feedback, they simply begin to ignore them. The employee is excluded from meetings, their emails go unanswered, and their contributions are dismissed. This creates a toxic atmosphere of uncertainty and insecurity, forcing the employee to second-guess their every move and constantly strive for the manager's approval, even without knowing what they need to do. The manager gains a subtle but powerful control, effectively silencing dissenting voices and reinforcing their authority. The impact of the silent treatment can be long-lasting and deeply damaging. Prolonged exposure can erode self-esteem, foster feelings of isolation and depression, and create a pervasive sense of insecurity in relationships. The constant need to anticipate and avoid triggering the silent treatment can lead to walking on eggshells, suppressing one's own needs and desires to appease the other person. This ultimately creates an unhealthy power dynamic where one person's emotional well-being is sacrificed for the sake of the other's control. Furthermore, it models poor communication skills and avoidance strategies, potentially perpetuating the cycle of manipulation in future relationships. The void, in this instance, becomes a weapon of profound emotional destruction, playing the victim, shielding through vulnerability. It's a masterclass in deflection, where perceived weakness becomes an impenetrable defense. At its core, this manipulation tactic leverages the natural human instinct to protect and nurture those who appear vulnerable or distressed. It's not merely about expressing sadness or acknowledging misfortune. It's a carefully orchestrated performance designed to elicit sympathy, manipulate behavior, and, ultimately, evade responsibility. The fundamental mechanism relies on the creation of an imbalance of power. By positioning themselves as helpless, oppressed, or emotionally fragile, individuals deploying this technique subtly shift the dynamic, disarming potential critics and neutralizing accountability. The victim cast themselves as inherently incapable of malice or wrongdoing, their actions framed as mere reactions to external forces or personal suffering. Criticism is thus reframed as cruelty, and questioning becomes akin to kicking someone when they're down. Consider this scenario. A project team member consistently misses deadlines, delivering substandard work. When confronted, instead of acknowledging the shortcomings or offering solutions, they launch into a tale of woe, detailing personal struggles, family emergencies, or past traumas. The intended effect is to evoke empathy from the team leader and colleagues. This pity then becomes a shield, deflecting scrutiny and excusing the unacceptable behavior. The missed deadlines become a minor detail overshadowed by the perceived suffering of the individual. The team, now feeling sympathetic, might pick up the slack, effectively enabling the behavior and reinforcing the victim narrative. This technique thrives on the manipulation of guilt and obligation. The victim implicitly suggests that holding them accountable would be heartless, insensitive, or even damaging. They weaponize vulnerability, turning their perceived weakness into a source of control. The inherent goodness in others is exploited, as people are naturally hesitant to cause further distress to someone already perceived to be suffering. Another potent mechanism is the strategic deployment of emotional language and exaggerated narratives. The victim will often use phrases loaded with emotional weight, describing themselves as broken, destroyed, or incapable. They may embellish details, adding layers of suffering to their story to amplify the emotional impact. This isn't necessarily conscious deception. Often, these individuals have internalized a victim mentality, truly believing in their own powerlessness. This sincerity, however, makes the manipulation all the more effective. The impact of this tactic can be devastating. On an individual level, it fosters resentment and distrust. Those around the victim may feel manipulated, taken advantage of, and emotionally drained. In the long term, it can erode relationships and create a climate of fear and suspicion. On a broader scale, it can stifle accountability and hinder progress. By constantly shifting blame and evading responsibility, the victim perpetuates a cycle of dysfunction, preventing true resolution and growth. Furthermore, the shield of vulnerability prevents the individual from confronting their own issues and developing healthy coping mechanisms. They remain trapped in a cycle of learned helplessness, forever relying on the sympathy and support of others, rather than taking ownership of their actions and seeking genuine solutions. The perceived safety of the victim role becomes a prison, preventing them from achieving true self-reliance and personal growth. Guilt tripping is more than just a passive-aggressive sigh or a pointed silence. It's a calculated manipulation, a strategic deployment of morality as a lever to control another person's behavior. At its core, guilt tripping exploits our inherent desire to be perceived as good, ethical, and caring individuals. It preys on the conscience, using the weight of perceived wrongdoing or the potential for it to influence choices and actions. The mechanism is often subtle, masked in concern or couched in self-pity. The guilt tripper rarely explicitly demands compliance. Instead, they insinuate, imply, and hint at the moral shortcomings of noncompliance. They're masters of the loaded question, the carefully worded statement that casts a shadow of doubt on your virtue should you choose a different path. Think of a parent consistently reminding their adult child of the sacrifices they made to provide them with a good life. They might not directly say, "You owe me," but the constant emphasis on their past hardships serves the same purpose. It creates a sense of obligation, a feeling that failing to meet their expectations is not just a disappointment, but a betrayal of their earlier sacrifices. This is morality leveraged as a debt, a burden of gratitude deliberately amplified to induce guilt and shape behavior. Another common tactic involves highlighting the negative consequences of your actions, often exaggerating them for dramatic effect. "If you don't come to my party, I'll be so incredibly lonely. It will ruin my entire birthday." The impact isn't presented as a simple disappointment, but a catastrophic emotional event directly attributable to your absence. The guilt tripper essentially positions themselves as a victim, dependent on your actions for their emotional well-being, thereby making your decision a moral one. Are you willing to inflict such pain? Guilt tripping can also manifest in the form of passive aggression, where resentment is expressed indirectly. Someone might agree to a request, but then consistently complain about how much trouble it is causing them, subtly implying that you are inconsiderate and selfish for making the request in the first place. The resentment festers, creating an atmosphere of unspoken disapproval that subtly coerces you into avoiding similar requests in the future. The moral lever here is the suggestion that you are burdening them, exploiting their willingness to help. The impact of guilt tripping can be profound. Over time, it can erode self-esteem and create a constant sense of obligation. Individuals subjected to chronic guilt tripping may find themselves prioritizing the needs and desires of the manipulator above their own, leading to resentment, burnout, and a distorted sense of personal boundaries. They may develop a pattern of people-pleasing behavior, driven by a fear of triggering the manipulator's guilt tactics. The constant pressure to avoid causing guilt can be emotionally exhausting and lead to feelings of anxiety and inadequacy. Ultimately, guilt tripping thrives on the victim's empathy and desire for approval. It's a subtle but powerful form of emotional manipulation that uses morality not as a guiding principle, but as a weapon to control and dominate. Recognizing the patterns and understanding the underlying mechanisms is the first step towards breaking free from its insidious grip. Deflection, the art of avoiding accountability, is a psychological maneuver where an individual skillfully redirects attention away from their own actions, inactions, or statements, effectively dodging responsibility. It's a sophisticated dance of misdirection, often executed with such finesse that the target is left bewildered, unsure of how they arrived at a completely different topic. At its core, deflection isn't about directly lying, although it can certainly incorporate untruths. It's about shifting the focus, muddying the waters, and creating enough ambiguity that accountability becomes elusive. The mechanisms behind deflection are varied, but typically involve employing tactics like changing the subject, this is the most straightforward form. When confronted, the individual abruptly introduces a new, often unrelated, topic. Imagine a manager being questioned about a missed deadline. Instead of addressing the issue, they might start discussing the company's recent marketing campaign, skillfully redirecting the conversation. Blaming others, shifting the blame onto someone else is a classic deflection technique. I didn't finish the report because Sarah didn't provide me with the necessary data. This isn't necessarily a lie. Sarah might have been late with the data, but it conveniently absolves the individual from any personal responsibility for the missed deadline, potentially ignoring other contributing factors under their control. Questioning the questioner, this involves attacking the person, raising the concern, rather than addressing the concern itself. Why are you even asking about this? Are you trying to undermine my authority? This tactic puts the questioner on the defensive, forcing them to justify their inquiry and diverting attention from the original issue. Minimizing the issue, downplaying the significance of the problem is another common strategy. It was just a small mistake. It's not a big deal. By minimizing the impact, the individual attempts to diminish their responsibility. They're hoping the other party will drop the matter, seeing it as insignificant. Feigning ignorance or confusion, appearing genuinely confused or unaware of the situation can be a powerful deflection technique. I'm not sure what you're talking about. I don't recall that happening. This allows the individual to buy time, gather their thoughts, and potentially craft a more convincing deflection strategy. It also puts the onus on the other person to provide detailed evidence, further diverting attention. Whataboutism, this involves responding to a criticism or accusation by raising a different issue, often involving the accuser or a related party. You're criticizing me for my environmental impact, but what about your own consumption habits? It doesn't address the initial criticism, but seeks to discredit the accuser or create a false equivalence. The impact of deflection can be significant. In personal relationships, it can erode trust and create resentment. A partner constantly deflecting responsibility for their actions will create an imbalance of power and hinder genuine communication. The other partner feels unheard, invalidated, and ultimately less valued. In professional settings, deflection can damage team morale, impede progress, and foster a culture of blame. When individuals are unwilling to take responsibility for their mistakes, it becomes difficult to learn from them and improve performance. Furthermore, it creates a climate of distrust where colleagues are hesitant to collaborate or offer honest feedback. On a larger scale, deflection is often used in politics and public discourse to avoid answering difficult questions or addressing controversial issues. Politicians might deflect by attacking their opponents, appealing to emotions, or simply changing the subject to a more favorable topic. This can mislead the public, hinder informed decision-making, and undermine democratic processes. Recognizing deflection is crucial for maintaining healthy relationships, fostering productive workplaces, and engaging in informed civic discourse. Being aware of the common tactics used in deflection allows you to challenge them directly, hold individuals accountable, and ensure that important issues are addressed effectively. It demands assertiveness, the ability to stay focused on the original point, and a refusal to be sidetracked by irrelevant arguments or personal attacks. Bait and switch, the lure of false promises. It's a manipulation tactic as old as commerce itself, yet psychological roots run far deeper than just advertising ploys. At its core, the bait and switch operates on the principles of desire, commitment, and cognitive dissonance. It begins with the bait, an enticing offer designed to lure someone in. This could be a product advertised at an unbelievably low price, a job posting promising incredible benefits, or even a romantic prospect seemingly tailored to fulfill every desire. The key is that the bait is deliberately attractive, playing on pre-existing needs and aspirations. Once the target is hooked, they've begun to psychologically commit. They've invested time, energy, and perhaps even a small amount of initial resources towards obtaining the promised reward. This is where the switch comes into play. Suddenly, the original offer becomes unavailable, undesirable, or strategically disparaged. That deeply discounted television? Oh, that model? We just sold the last one. But let me show you this much better, slightly more expensive, one with quantum technology. That dream job? Well, the role has shifted slightly. It's more data entry than strategic planning, but it's a foot in the door. That seemingly perfect partner? Turns out, they're incredibly controlling, but at least they're wealthy, right? The effectiveness of the bait and switch lies in exploiting cognitive dissonance. Having already committed to pursuing the initial offer, the target experiences discomfort when faced with its sudden unavailability. To resolve this dissonance, the mental stress of holding conflicting beliefs, they often rationalize accepting the less desirable alternative. They might convince themselves that the new offer is almost as good, that the sunk cost of their initial investment justifies continuing, or that starting over would be too difficult. In essence, they rewrite their own narrative to justify their continued engagement, even when it's no longer in their best interest. The mechanism is further fueled by the psychology of loss aversion. The fear of losing the time and effort already invested can outweigh the rational assessment of the new situation. People often become so fixated on not losing what they've already put in that they fail to recognize they're being led down a path they wouldn't have initially chosen. Consider the car dealership example. You go in for the advertised deal of the century, only to find out that specific car sold yesterday or has undisclosed damage. The salesperson then directs you to a similar but pricier model, emphasizing how lucky you are to even find that one on the lot. Many customers, already picturing themselves driving away in a new car, succumb to the switch. The impact of bait and switch tactics can range from minor inconvenience and financial loss to significant emotional distress and even manipulation in personal relationships. In business, it erodes trust and damages brand reputation. In interpersonal dynamics, it can create a cycle of manipulation, where one partner uses false promises to control the other. Recognizing the underlying psychological principles at play is crucial to avoiding falling victim to this deceptively powerful mind game. It requires a conscious effort to detach from the initial promise, objectively evaluate the new offer, and be willing to walk away, regardless of the time and effort already invested. Only then can one truly break free from the lure of false promises. Negging, the subversive insult. It sounds almost contradictory, doesn't it? An insult presented as something else. That something else is the key to understanding this manipulative tactic. Negging isn't simply being rude. It's a carefully crafted backhanded compliment, a subtle put-down disguised as playful banter, designed to undermine a person's self-esteem and make them seek validation. At its core, negging operates on the principle of creating insecurity. The practitioner, often subtly, delivers a remark that chips away at the target's confidence. The insult is usually veiled, making it ambiguous enough for the target to question whether they're overreacting, whether it was just a joke, or if they're being too sensitive. This ambiguity is crucial. It forces the target to second-guess themselves, placing them in a position of vulnerability. The mechanism behind negging exploits the human desire for approval and connection. We are, by nature, social creatures. We crave acceptance and positive regard from others. When a person receives a neg, it creates a cognitive dissonance. They are simultaneously drawn to the potential for positive attention from the negger while also experiencing a sting of disapproval. This creates an internal conflict, making the target question their own worth and seek the negger's approval to resolve that conflict. Consider this hypothetical scenario. Imagine someone meeting a person for the first time at a social gathering. Instead of offering a straightforward compliment, the negger might say something like, "That's a bold choice of outfit." It takes confidence to pull that off. The statement appears on the surface to acknowledge the person's confidence, a perceived positive trait. However, the initial qualifier bold choice immediately casts doubt, implying the outfit is unusual, perhaps even unflattering. The target is left wondering if they should feel complimented or insulted. Another example could be, "You're surprisingly intelligent. I didn't expect that." This compliment hinges on the presupposition that the target is not expected to be intelligent, implying a low initial expectation. This creates a subtle power dynamic, placing the negger in a position of perceived superiority and the target in a position of needing to prove themselves. The impact of negging can be insidious. Over time, repeated exposure to these subtle insults can erode a person's self-worth, making them more dependent on the negger for validation. This dependency, whether consciously recognized or not, gives the negger control. The target may start to change their behavior, appearance, or opinions in an attempt to gain the negger's approval, further reinforcing the power dynamic. Furthermore, the ambiguity inherent in negging can make it difficult to address. If the target confronts the negger can easily deflect criticism by claiming they were just joking or that the target is too sensitive. This gaslighting effect further isolates the target and makes them question their own perception of reality. It's important to distinguish negging from playful teasing or good-natured ribbing. The crucial difference lies in the intent. Playful teasing is mutual, consensual, and aimed at creating lighthearted fun and strengthening a bond. Negging, on the other hand, is a one-sided power play intended to undermine and manipulate. The target of negging often feels belittled, insecure, and confused, while the negger seeks to gain control and validation through the target's lowered self-esteem. Recognizing negging requires awareness of these subtle dynamics and a critical evaluation of the intent behind the seemingly innocuous remarks.